Good morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. I hope you're well. I hope your weekend was as good as can be expected in the circumstances, particularly, of course, if you have family in Israel or Gaza. I can't begin to imagine where your brain, where your mind is, where your heart is at the moment. But we return to that territory inevitably. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. I think we got it right last week, and I'm not going to apologise for a little bit of reflection, a little bit of retrospection. There are two ways I can do my job. I can come on air not caring, just trying to rile up one constituency of people and placate another, and possibly even change my mind the next day, rile up another constituency of people and placate the other one. Or we can sort of rise above the fray and just treat it like we treat everything else, turn off some of our deeper emotions, our bleaker feelings, and look at some of the, to my mind, relatively trivial side issues and side stories. You know, the invitation to attack the BBC is always paramount, whatever the crisis. Even Gary Lineker, bless him, was getting a kicking on social media over the last few days for not offering up any profound opinions about the terror attacks upon Israel. So exactly the same people that have spent much of the last decade bemoaning Gary Lineker's freedom to have an opinion on anything were complaining about him not offering up an opinion on. So that's you can do it like that if you want. You can talk about Wembley, you can talk about the BBC, you can talk about these sort of more obvious, if you like, dividing points, you could call them. And I understand why that's tempting. Because the alternative is to feel what many of us feel at the moment, which is a sort of grim impotence. Obviously, nobody conducting or contributing to any of these conversations has any influence at all over what happens next. Hardly anybody in Gaza or Israel have any influence at all over what happens next. So there's nothing substantive or constructive to be done, to be had. And the temptation, therefore, to close your eyes and put your fingers in the ears and, I don't know, talk about Strictly Come Dancing is huge. But we don't, do we? It's why we meet up every morning at 10 o'clock. We are people who engage in the world around us and try to come to better understandings of some of the issues unfolding. And some days we succeed, some days we succeed, some weeks we succeed, and some days we don't. But we try. That's all. We try. And we try together. And sometimes we fall out, sometimes we disagree, sometimes we, want to slap each other around the chops with a wet mackerel, and other days we want to give each other a big cuddle and a big hug. But we're never going to agree. There's never going to be a consensus on this particular issue, this particular subject, and neither are there going to be any winners. I think there will be a lot of losers. I think possibly there will only be losers in the great scheme of things, but whether or not losing feels like winning to some people involved, only time will tell. So here's what I won't do. What I won't do when I'm contemplating a dead civilian is wait to find out where they were born or where they came from before deciding how sad I feel. I won't do that. I won't feel more sadness or less sadness according to geographical or religious or national origins. I can't do that, actually, but I won't pretend that I can either. And I know that had I been born in a different part of the world under a different star, I would probably find it quite easy. It's like family. If a member of your family dies, you feel it a lot more keenly than you do if a complete stranger dies, however brutal the circumstances. And family is a broad term. Kinship extends far beyond biology, doesn't it? So, if someone from your country, or so at least someone from your house, your household, your street, your village, your town, your city, your country, you feel a little bit more fellow feeling towards them usually than you do towards complete strangers. It's not a hard and fast rule. It doesn't, it's not scientific. And of course, there'll be people on your street with whom you share nothing. You have absolutely nothing in common. You might have more in common with somebody in Kuala Lumpur or Timbuktu than you do with someone living over the road or with Dirty Gertie at number 30. That's just the way of things. But there's a reason why when the news comes on, if you grew up outside a big city or you grew up in a small part of a big city and a news story focuses on that bit, there's a reason why your ears prick up. If I hear the word Kidderminster in the news, there's a reason why my ears prick up. And, then you've got some of the more, what you might call biological or genetic elements, and you see someone who looks like you suffering or struggling, you will respond to it, usually. Not always, but differently from how you will when it's happening to someone who doesn't look like you. But by complete coincidence, as the tragedies of last week unfolded and the atrocities of last week unfolded, I was reading a lot about the Rwandan genocide, which in this country, it was barely an afterthought in the context of news reporting. Up to 1 million people massacred in a single African state, and really in the British media, in the British news bulletins, it was not ignored, but my goodness me, it was overlooked. It didn't receive any. So there's no point in claiming, in the context of news reporting or even emotional response, that all lives are equal. They're just not. They're just not. But I will not be told to feel sadder for one dead civilian because they come from there than I do or sadder about one dead civilian because they come from over there. I want to make that absolutely clear. And then you come to I hope that allows me now to say a couple of things to you under cover of kindness, because I won't get everything right, and I might be clumsy, and I might get something wrong. But when you don't have any personal investment, familial investment, historic investment, you still feel the horror of it, and the humanity of it over the weekend, as I thought about it, came to me to feel like, and this is where I don't want to misspeak, so if I change my mind about this, I reserve the right to say so. I began to think of it more as a humanitarian crisis than a military one, because the situation is so intractable. It's so old and so intractable that no one can answer the questions about, well, what would you do differently, or what should they do, or how does it end, or what does peace look like, or so it's almost got the feeling from the outside, and I categorically stress, I understand it would not feel remotely like this from the inside, at least I don't think it would, but like an earthquake or a landslide or a tsunami, you just feel there's nothing that you can do to stop it. But there is, as Antony Blinken and Joe Biden are exploring as we speak. Pressure is being put on Israel to moderate its response to the terror attacks of last week. And that is the entry point for our conversation together today. Because if the people killing your kith and kin obey nothing that remotely resembles rules, whether you want to talk about international law or the Geneva Convention or the basic requisites of engagement, if the people killing your kith and kin on a scale that hasn't been seen since the Holocaust, then how reasonable is the requirement that you follow rules they laugh at? Now, I personally think it's a hugely important issue, and that issues like collective punishment and war crimes and international law, no sovereign state should be exempt from them. It's almost the difference, if you like, between a soldier and a terrorist. It's the rules of engagement, isn't it? But my God, it's easy to say that from the security of an air-conditioned, or actually this week, a centrally heated London studio. Talk about hermetically sealed. Sit here pontificating about the importance of international law and the unacceptability of collective punishment. But then you're back to it's not falling into the trap. I'll tell you what it is. If you think of it, if you start to think of it as an earthquake or a tsunami, it insulates you from having to apportion personal responsibility to other human beings. So people in the Hamas leadership made the decision to attack Israel in the way that they did. Fighters, terrorists, militants, call them what you will. And in the context of the amount of blood spilt, the words in that don't matter that much to me, but it's possible I'm getting that wrong, probable even. But that they made decisions. So it's not a natural disaster. They made decisions to do disgusting things. And individuals in Israel, from Benjamin Netanyahu down, are in the process of making decisions to do what I would describe as disgusting things. So what are the checks and balances? What are the limits on what those things can be? Already, for example, the cutting off of water, apparently reversed temporarily as a result of international pressure. Joe Biden doesn't seem to me to be in or to have much of a grip upon the wrist of Benjamin Netanyahu for whatever reasons. But the question now has to be, I think we need to remind ourselves why Israel has to play by different rules from Hamas, don't we? Or you need to argue that they don't. And I today will be the referee. 0345 6060973. Why does Israel have to play by rules that Hamas holds in complete contempt when the stakes are civilians from both sides of this bloody divide? 0345 6060973. Or, and I do think that this is an argument that you can tell people think it, but they rarely say it out loud. I do think, and I do understand where it comes from, that there is a sense that Israel shouldn't have to abide by, among many people, among many observers. And goodness knows, I don't like the sort of little counterfactuals insisting that you imagine being in a horrible situation. But if you had just lost someone and you were being told that the response must be moderate and the response must be proportionate and the response must be responsible and the response must be legal, the response to something disgusting, something unthinkable, something unjustifiable, something illegal, I can see why that would be difficult to put up with. So you can, if you want, make an argument. But if you do make that argument, you're essentially arguing that international law is an ass. And, you know, it's a luxury that in the real cut and thrust of conflict, it's a luxury that we can't afford. A lot of you have read, as I have, Yuval Noah Harari, the writer, the academic who wrote Sapiens, who essentially argued on Friday that if Israel doesn't hold itself to higher standards than Hamas, then what's the point? And I kind of have some sympathy for that, with the constant caveat that I'm not involved. I haven't lost anyone. I haven't lived my entire life as a Jew knowing what persecution, pogroms and holocausts feel like in the context of my own family history. I haven't lived in Gaza Strip in a state of perpetual poverty and confinement. So I haven't lost someone to Hamas attacks or Israeli attacks. So it's easy to say. But that's why we have these conversations every day, and that's what we're talking about today. Why is it important that a people who have been attacked by enemies who hold law, morality and decency in complete contempt, why is it important that their response should hold law, morality and decency in the highest regard? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 10:17. It is 20 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've made a couple of recommendations about things to read since the dreadful, terrible events of last weekend occurred. And I'd add another one to the list today. Is a remarkable piece in the London Review of Books called The Compass of Mourning that I'd really recommend heartily. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. Let's get the phone lines open. Michelle is in Barnet. Michelle, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's my first time calling in, and I just want to say I do appreciate that while sometimes I'm screaming at my radio listening to you, I can hear that you're really approaching the story with, compassion, and I appreciate that.
I hope so, Michelle. Thank you.
So I just want to say it's been absolutely exhausting being a Jewish person in the UK this week. And we're reeling from the pain of what's happened. I've tried not to actually look at the imagery because I don't want it to, be forever a mark on my soul. But, it's hard, really hard when you're seeing the visceral images of the depth of what people can actually go to. But I wanted to actually talk about, what's interesting is I've also been helping in activations to try and help get humanitarian aid into the country because as a community, Jewish people are very good at doing. We're not so good necessarily at speaking. Well, there's two thoughts of opinion on that, but we like to just do, and that's how we kind of help. And you'll probably find that more people are actually doing things and calling in to the radio. But, we've had a flurry and it's been horrendous from an anti-Semitism worry this week.
Yes.
And we are so lucky to be having Rishi Sunak and so many level-headed people in government, because all I can say is that had Corbyn been in government, we would definitely have been leaving this country. And I'm someone who's British-born. I can't explain that to you as a British person, how that feels. But what I wanted to say, and I don't want to get cut off, but...
you've worried me. Carry on.
No, because what I wanted to say is that... why the anti-Semitism has been so difficult is because obviously, I hear you talking about does Israel operate to, do they need to operate to moral rules? Of course they do. They are the Israeli Defense Force. And as Jewish people and Judaism, you are governed to act in a certain way. Nothing is more important than life. And the way that I'm looking on Facebook of that image of that poor girl who's in her underwear, her G-string and her bra.
Yes, careful, because trigger warnings are important.
Right,
People, there's a reason why you don't look at the pictures that you've just described in grim terms. So I'm also reading about the 6-year-old child in America murdered for being Palestinian.
But let me just talk about the no, just before. Obviously,
I'm going to have to hurry you now, Michelle.
Right. But what I want to say is the conflating of how you can talk about the Israeli army that's going in to get its hostages. Imagine in the UK,
the coverage in Israel. The coverage in Israel has been incredibly critical about the lack of concern being expressed for the hostages.
Well, that's it, because this is now, as you said, how many
by the Israeli government.
But the problem is because
nobody thinks that cutting off electricity and water and telling 1.1 million people to relocate is about rescuing hostages, Michelle.
Well, this is an active hostage situation.
Yes, but no one thinks this is the whole point in a way, isn't it? You can't with a straight face argue that these are measures being undertaken to rescue hostages.
I totally disagree, James.
Right. So talk me through how it works then.
But as a British citizen, imagine if we had people, babies, children, grandparents, people,
Yes, I can imagine that, but talk me through how these tactics work.
Well, they have to go in on a ground level to try and find where people are and rescue them. That's what's happening. That's why they.
Why are they moving 1.1? Why are they moving 1.1 million people to the south? Who?
They want to get the people. We know that Hamas uses people.
But wouldn't you take the hostages with you?
All I think about is, what can you imagine how amazing it would be if the Jewish people had given the benefit of getting out the way? No, because Hamas doesn't behave like it does.
But you're not supposed to be conflating. You're not supposed to be.
That's my exact point. Right. I'm just demonstrating how we don't behave like those animals.
Yes, that's fine. But how does this tactic work? How does cutting off electricity and water for 1 million people?
Well, because you know that Hamas is using the people as human shields, and they're trying to get the enemy out.
So what happens? They all stay.
In Afghanistan,
you can keep talking, but here's the problem, and it's not really the question that I'm asking. But I understand that's a bit ambitious and optimistic of me, given the depth of emotion that everybody is feeling. But I don't understand. I am a Hamas terrorist. I am holding an Israeli hostage. I become more likely to peacefully hand that hostage back as a consequence of what Israel is going to undertake in the next few days. I just don't understand how you end up at that conclusion. I understand why you desperately want it to be true, but it sounds absurd.
But you say that, but I'm no hostage negotiator expert. But
no, but you're telling me that you're certain
that when your enemy has your people, you're trying to make it an uncomfortable climate to try and get the people out. But that's what. And
how does that happen though? Because the hostages are on the receiving end of the bombardments and the collective punishments as well.
I'm not privy to the operational detail, but what I can say
you don't
is,
have
as a
to be
British
privy to the
citizen-
operational
No, but as I
detail.
said,
You have
as a
to
British
justify
citizen,
your own
I
position
know-
that this is going to work, because I don't think it's got anything to do with hostages. I think this is revenge, and I understand that. Retaliation is perhaps a better word.
No,
and
no,
we know that. Well, of course it is, and we know
But
that.
that's a luxury that you can say because you
Well, of
haven't got
course.
150 people who
Well,
are trapped in a,
And I
under
haven't
the-
got 1,300 people dead either, or whatever the Palestinian figure is now. So this
do
isn't
you think that you should just
conflation.
forget about those hostages.
No, but
Should there be no attempt to rescue them? Then? Is
Well,
that
I
what
don't
you're
think
saying?
there is any attempt to
that was
rescue
your
them.
family member.
I don't think there is any attempt to rescue them. That's what the bulk of coverage in Israel has said all week. That they've been treated with borderline contempt.
Because it hasn't been immediate rescue.
No, because the tactics that are being undertaken cannot possibly be cast as hostage rescuing tactics. And I think you must know that, because you've gone from saying you're certain that it will to saying, well, I don't know any of the operational details and I don't understand any.
I don't, but
so
I
just have
know
a
that
crack
as a UK
then, please.
but just
have
as a
one
UK
go
resident,
at explaining
if
to
we were
me
held hostage,
how
if we had-
no,
you would be
you can
expecting
do
your
all the
government to go in and
counterfactuals.
get
You can do all
But
the
you would.
counterfactuals you
would.
want. So how does it help? How does it work? That's all I want to know.
They're trying to locate and take out Hamas, which they've said that they want to do.
But Hamas are with
and
the hostages.
Right. So actually, what you're asking
So how do you
me,
take
are
out? Here's
asking
a
me-
terrorist in a
are
room
you
with a
asking
hostage.
me, how do you? So you tell me.
No, I don't
Do you
need to
speak
tell you.
Hamas,
I've told you
and
what
you
I
say
think.
to Hamas,
There we
please,
are.
can you kindly return the hostages, other than actually forcibly rescuing them?
So how does
what
it
is
work,
the better
Michelle?
option?
How does it work? Here's a room. There are 2 terrorists and 1 hostage in the room. Tell me how these tactics rescue the hostage.
Well, they'll take out the terrorists. That's what
They're in the same room.
They're having a ground invasion. I don't know why you're asking this question like it's the first time that hostage rescue has ever happened.
Because I don't think this is hostage rescue, and I don't think you do either.
Right. No, to be honest, I do think this is hostage rescue.
Well, then you must tell me how it
it's
works.
exactly the same.
You must tell me how it
exactly
works.
I just explained. But what I'm
Go on,
understanding
then.
is that you think it's okay just to leave these people
I
to
think
die.
anything's okay. I don't have any. That's not fair at all. I haven't said anything.
It is, because then,
No, I'm just asking you, because your justification for what is going to happen is that it's a hostage rescue attempt, and I just want one sentence that would allow me to think, oh yes, she's got a point. This looks like a hostage rescue attempt.
When Israel disengaged from
please
Gaza,
answer my question specific to the.
Answer my question. When
I don't
Israel
have to answer your
disengaged from
question
Gaza-
because I'm not endorsing any course of action. I'm comparing it to a natural disaster or a tsunami. You're saying that this carnage that's about to be unleashed is justified by the fact that it's a hostage rescue action. I'm saying I can't really see any evidence at all for that rationale, and I'm just asking you to provide a little bit.
Well, it's definitely not the same as a tsunami because that has been man-made entirely. So that's not a fair point of comparison.
Well, I know, but it's the Israeli Defense Force that is on the offensive now, not the Hamas terrorists. So I mean, I'm using
I don't know if they're going to. I don't think that's a very fair fight when they're being backed and armed by.
No, I know you
high
don't.
powers.
I know you don't. But I'm just gonna. I'm not
listening.
listening. I've given you the whole of this section of the program. Can we agree that you haven't got a single scintilla of support for the idea that this is a good way of rescuing hostages?
I don't know what the other option is apart from just.
That's very honest of you. That's very honest of you. But even more honest would be to say the truth, which we both know to be that you haven't got a single scintilla of support for the idea that this is a good way of rescuing hostages. And much of the coverage, which doesn't mean it's correct, but there's certainly a majority of the coverage, including the families of an awful lot of the hostages, which you must have read, Michelle. You must have seen this. They do not believe that this is a hostage rescue attempt. And Frank, I don't think anybody does really. It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:35 is the time, just for context, because it is important. This is from the Times of Israel, and it was published yesterday under the headline, Families of Gaza Hostages Beg for Medical Attention, Say Government Forsaking Them. A spokesman for the families of the missing Israelis and foreigners feared to be held by Palestinian terror groups in Gaza slammed the government Saturday for abandoning the hostages after its representative said Israel would presently not engage in prisoner swap negotiations. Ronen Tazur, the head of the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, said at a press conference in Tel Aviv that by refusing to negotiate with enemies that want to destroy Israel, as stated earlier Saturday by National Security Advisor Tazachi Hanegbi, the government is in effect abandoning the captives. And as I said, that is that's reflective of the broader reporting of how the families of hostages feel, and the question of how cutting off energy and food and water supplies and compelling 1.1 million people to leave their homes and everything they own and relocate to a different part of a blockaded territory, how that would be an effective means of hostage rescue seems to me to be a question that no one can answer, because it's not. But I also understand why it is much more preferable to profess support for these actions in the context of it being a hostage rescue rather than it being in the context of either the revenge or, as United Nations have already contended, being well, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs as well has said that you are looking at collective punishment. So yes, these are the words of Joseph Beryl, that there are some actions that are not in accordance with international law. And then I'd add, well, what about Dresden? What about the Blitz? Well, that's collective punishment. I don't know enough international law to know whether things have changed or whether there are different rules of engagement. But, there's no earthly way that we bombed Dresden expecting just sort of Nazi soldiers to be caught in the explosions. And the same when the Luftwaffe bombed Coventry or Clydebank. It just seems to me to be a little bit of perhaps a nicety that doesn't stand up to scrutiny. But anyway, I've talked too much. 10:37 is the time. Christopher's in Edinburgh. Christopher, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi. It's pretty saddening that this is the first instance that we get to speak after listening to. So it really is like the loss of life is just horrific everywhere.
Yes.
I'll try and articulate what the thoughts were in my head. Was the only place they can take place. To your question, the question that I recall is, why is it important for the Israel state to act in a civil way, more or less?
Even is it? I'd even remove the why from that. I'd say, is it important that Israel acts?
Yes. So why I was saying to your producer, why it's important is twofold. And again, I'm going to try and articulate this, A, being on national radio, and B, my brain operates in sparks. But
of course.
There's two things. One is, from my stance, as if you're a disenfranchised person, right? If you feel like an underdog in any way, shape, or form, whether it's class or race or sexuality or anything, this is a flagrant display of an asymmetrical battle where the people who hold the power are saying, you behave this way, right? And then we're gonna take our civility as a premise and then just operate exactly the same way with power on our side. Does that make sense? I kind of lost my thought there.
Well, it does. It does now, but it didn't last Monday. Last Monday, all the power was being wielded by the terrorists in Israel.
Yes,
the Hamas terrorists in Israel.
Horrible, right? But when you think of when I say asymmetrical, you think of someone who's got missiles and someone who's got rocks, just as a real base level thing. The people who got missiles are in that position because they hold power, they hold weight, they have a standing in the world. So they operate, like you said, under Geneva Conventions, under guidelines that we look as people who may be disenfranchised to them to uphold that model. If they uphold that model of civility, then we have faith. And that leads back to what you said at the start of the program, which was this general sense of impotency. When there's a hopelessness, if states that are emboldened by power to act in a way that's civil, if they don't do that, that removes that mask of civility that we're told to toe the line.
But it is just a mask, isn't it, though? That's why I just mentioned Dresden, because, this idea of collective punishment, it's a very powerful phrase, and we can bandy it around and point out that Hamas would treat it with complete contempt. But we've done it.
Well, yes,
we probably did it in Afghanistan. I suppose it wasn't deliberate, you'd say.
We have.
Yes.
But are we hip? Are we knowledgeable to that? So what I'm saying, sorry, and I'll try and articulate it really precisely again, is if us as a people look at a state that has a position of power and they don't operate accordingly, then when you brought up things about the Tories some time ago saying, one rule for them, one rule for us. How can we toe the line? This is the one point when they don't, and they're in a position to do so, and they can fire back 10 times harder. That's one. And the second part that's heartbreaking is for my Jewish brothers and sisters, and I'm not Jewish, I just mean, theys and thems, whoever. When I think of them who are now it's going to embolden racists, it's going to embolden anti-Semites, it's going to embolden people, because the Israeli state, which has, it has an agenda and alternatives that are beyond the people who just subscribe to that because they were either born into it or they feel connection to their kin or their tribe. This is going to be horrific for them. Horrific, because look at what Israel's doing. Look what they're doing, and look at their ties, and all the conspiracy theories, and all the things that are happening in the world.
It's so chicken and egg that, though, isn't it? Because I think you're right, and we took a remarkable call on Friday from an author and academic who studied Boko Haram a lot, and similar points were being made. But it's chicken and egg. You know, there were two women on the protests in London this weekend wearing pictures of hang gliders.
Yes.
On their back, so celebrating terror attacks.
The Colditz glider.
The what?
No. Was it the Colditz gliders?
No, they were wearing hang gliders on their back as a reference to the mode of entry into Israel undertaken by some of the Hamas terrorists.
I may be off topic, and you guys, someone on the millions of people listening to your show, kudos James, can check it out. But was not the Colditz glider? I thought it was a reference to the Colditz gliders who were Jewish prisoners who escaped using hang gliders. No,
I don't think so. No.
It'd
be a very odd thing to do. Certainly, all of the coverage I've seen has been fairly clear about what they thought. I mention it only as a chicken and egg example because that they are there doing that, and other small groups of people celebrating Hamas's actions on British streets, as we saw the footage. They're doing that before Israel responds. So that's all I mean. Obviously, those sentiments will be exacerbated by perceived. Or by the actions of Israel, whatever they do. But it would be naive, and I know you're not, but it's important to point out, it would be very naive to pretend that they didn't already exist, that they weren't already there. Thank you, Christopher. I didn't think we'd do Idiot's Corner today, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to allow myself the fun of an Idiot's Corner. So here's a text that's come in. James, the Blitz was a German bombing campaign. This is from Isabel, who's in Kent, against the UK, not the reverse. Gosh, thanks, Isabel. Thank goodness you were here. And you'll be able to point to exactly where Dresden is on a map of the United Kingdom, would you, in response to the point that I was making? Roy's in Bristol. Roy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
What I'd like to say is that I think the Israeli strategy is exactly what Hamas wanted when they launched this horrendous attack. Why did they do it? I think they wanted, like the 9/11 people, to provoke a violent response that would, one, radicalize certain Palestinians, two, undermine the Abraham Accord, three, increase division, and four, destabilize the region. The truth is that Israel should have taken a big breath and thought, right, what's our first priority? Get the hostages out. How are they going to get the hostages out? Certainly not by bombing. So how can they do it? They can't negotiate with Hamas. I am sure there are third-party agencies that could assist in that process. That should be number one priority. Number two, surely, should be thinking, right, we've got to decapitate Hamas. Bombing isn't the way. Mossad is an extremely efficient, at times ruthless, agency. Surely they could identify leaders, and then there could perhaps be special operations to take them out.
Well, you used to have that reputation for being almost sort of James Bond-like, didn't they? But I think that's taken a bit of a battering, not least with the intelligence failures of last week.
Well, that is
but there are people, as I understand it, there are people in Qatar widely regarded as leaders, de facto leaders of Hamas, living in peace and relative prosperity. So that's what you mean by beheading, I think.
Yes, and I mean, there's another aspect as well. This will never happen with the current government of Israel, unfortunately. But can you imagine a different path where Israel thought, right, how the hell are we going to try and calm down things? Obviously, what's happening in the West Bank is a problem. They could say no more settlements, and we're going to try and open up contact between settlements and Palestinians there. We're going to try.
But then wouldn't Hamas claim that as a win?
Well, what Hamas would claim as a win, I fear, James, is exactly what's happening. They are a death cult. They don't care about other Palestinians dying. They really don't.
Absolutely.
They really don't. That's what they want. And this is why I feel so upset. I mean, I've been in tears this week, James. In tears after the original incident, and in tears about, literally, tears about Gaza as well.
Yes.
And I think, oh my God, this is so bonkers. That's really what I wanted to say. I just wish Israel could take a breath and take a different approach.
Well, then we are, and this is where I struggle as well, Roy, because you are saying that it is beholden upon Israel to be both bigger and better than Hamas. And I agree. I agree with you up to the point where someone says, "Well, what if it was you? How would you do that?" And that's actually why, as quite a few people have pointed out in response to Michelle's call at the top of the show, that's why victims of crime don't get to decide what the sentence is, isn't it?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Completely right, James.
And that is where international law kicks in. And I'm getting the lessons that I knew I would get, thankfully. 1949 for the Geneva Convention. So under the terms of that convention, then possibly the Blitz undertaken by the Nazis and the bombings of Dresden and other German cities led by Bomber Harris would perhaps have breached the terms of the Geneva Convention and constituted war crimes had those rules been in place at the time. So, I mean, the moral high ground is pretty hard for anybody to lay claim to. We can be fairly clear about the depravity of organisations and acts and historical occurrences, but no one really can point to themselves and say, well, we've always behaved with absolute decorum and decency. So what right does anyone else have to demand that another nation should do? Thank you, Roy. A big deep breath and then a prioritisation of what? Peace. Nick had a former Israeli Prime Minister on today talking about the two-state solution, and yet there's some reports of Netanyahu giving a speech in, I think it was either 2009 or 2019. Forgive me for not having it at my fingertips. I will have by the time we come back from the next junction, when he talked about if you don't want a two-state solution, then the best thing you can do is essentially support Hamas. So the idea that any of this is black and white or crystal clear is very, very difficult to sustain. 10:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I said I would go into a little bit more detail than that after the junction. So here we are. This is something that Benjamin Netanyahu was quoted as saying to his Likud party's Knesset members in March of 2019. But it hasn't. The alleged remarks have not been validated by secondary sources, although Tal Schneider, a very well-respected writer for the Times of Israel, has provided some fairly detailed accounts of how it is of a piece. The thinking is of a piece with broader trends. And the quote is this: anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy. But as I say, I've seen that widely reported, but it's important to stress it's never been validated by secondary sources. 10:52 is the time. Joe's in Frome. Joe, what would you like to say?
Well, thank you. First of all, you kept me saying last week I was in Boston in a peace conference, and just every morning at 5 o'clock hearing you just kept me going.
Thank you. I've worked out who you are, Joe, just from that, for the fact that you were at a peace conference. You're Joe Berry, who
that's right.
You lost your father, Sir Anthony Berry, in the IRA bomb attack on the Brighton Hotel during Conservative Party conference in 1984.
Yeah, so last week was the 39th anniversary, and I pledged to carry on turning my pain into working for peace, and for the 40th anniversary, create a whole year of bringing love and kindness and shared humanity. And that, I think, is the message about shared humanity. And I actually remember I was in Dresden about 15 years ago, right, and I met women who were 10 when we bombed Dresden. And they said, I remember their stories as they had to run for their freedom. There were no men there. There were only mothers and children, so you're absolutely right about that. Mm. And I'm connecting right now to the Parent Circle Family Forum, who are a group of Israelis and Palestinians who've been bereaved. And they're saying, by taking sides, you're not helping bring peace. And out of their pain, they hear the demand of the other. They don't believe in the enemy. And there was a vigil yesterday of Palestinians, Israelis, who have been bereaved, saying, violence does not bring our loved ones back. Violence just diminishes our reality. We need to find a way where we uphold the dignity of both sides. that to me is the way forward.
And the sides here are the people of Israel and the people of Gaza, not the combatants or terrorists.
No, it's about people. It's about the fact that we do share our humanity, and we need to break the cycle of violence and revenge. And I can only break it for myself, which is what I've been doing.
Just would you briefly tell people what you did in that field? Because not with regard to Patrick McGee, who planted the bomb that killed your father.
Yeah. Well, after the peace process, I decided to meet him to see him as a human being, because I never wanted an enemy. I wanted to understand his story, and that first meeting turned into, it was 2000, so 23 years of dialogue, and I'm going to be with him sharing a platform in Kosovo next week.
Gosh.
And for me, it's about dialogue and understanding, and yes, I don't agree with everything he says, but I can listen to him and understand his story and allow him his dignity, but at the same time, sometimes challenge him.
Yes.
And I believe we can have empathy for people who are different to us. But in the midst of pain, I mean, I felt the kind of pain that wants to go for revenge.
Sure.
I've chosen to not follow that part of me. But I think one of your callers said, take a breath. Take a breath, see what I need to focus on my trauma, heal my trauma enough to be able to actually act as a human being, recognizing that we all have humanity.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you were listening today, helping to keep me sane. So it's a reciprocal arrangement, Jo, on this occasion. But given that your story is, and for people who may be hearing it for the very first time, it will be very, very arresting. Given that your path is so extraordinary, how do you retain your optimism, if you don't mind me asking, that you might provide a light for others to follow?
That's such a brilliant question. And, you provide me some hope at times, like last week. And then, like my friends at Parent Circle, everyone, look them up. The vigil's online, you can hear it. It's beautiful. It's people right in the middle of that conflict. They're crying with their pain, but they're saying, no more violence, please. No one join our group, because everyone is bereaved. Gosh. There are amazing people around the world. The people who, after 9/11, the next day are on the streets being bereaved, saying, please, no more pain in our name, no more violence in our name. It's the courageous people who are in the midst of war, in the midst of conflict. They're the ones that give me hope. And our young people, I go into schools, they're amazing. There's hope everywhere, and I actively work on it. Otherwise, I don't know how I would survive.
Well,
and I want to give more hope as well. Peace is possible. As human beings, we have an amazing way to transform our pain into working for peace and bring kindness and compassion. And in the end, love. Love is what it's about.
Thank you, Jo. I mean, it's hard to imagine that attitude prevailing in the coming days, isn't it? But it makes it all the more important to hold on to.
Yeah, exactly. And we need to do this together. I think we can't be on our own in these dark days.
Thank you. I
send my love to everyone and to you.
Well, and me to you. And thank you. And as I say, when I talk about not having, if you like, any personal investment in any of the issues, Jo, of course, has the greatest personal investment in terror attacks imaginable, having lost her father to one in 1984. But a deeply inspirational woman. And if that's the first time you've come across her, then I'm sure you will share that view already. It's coming up to 10:59. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And the question really of why Israel must abide by different rules from its enemies, in this case Hamas, has been a bit subsumed by other contributions, which is quite right and quite correct. But I think we may stay with it or steer back towards it for at least a little while. But I don't know that the whole 3 hours of the show, or even perhaps 2, will be dedicated to these contemplations until the story begins to change. And that's why Jo's words ring so powerfully, isn't it? Because the story is going to change, and it's going to change in the worst ways. And it is going to get a hell of a lot worse before it even begins to get better. And I wonder whether that is something that there is a consensus on being inevitable and necessary. There's definitely not unanimity, Some of the international response speaks towards consensus, but some leaders are standing out now, notably I think in Ireland and Belgium, but not really here. I don't know why that is or what it means. It just is, isn't it? It's 11 o'clock. It is 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You can't really... I don't think we can dive into the sort of broader international context, the international response, until the next chapter has been written. Forgive me, I nearly said in blood then, which I think would have been unhelpfully emotive. But I don't think it can be discussed. But Sunak's words there were interesting, because you can justify anything if you paint it as removing the threat of another terror attack on Israel from the future. And I guess that's what they'll do. It's as if, I mean, you know that old definition of insanity, don't you? It's when you keep doing the same thing again and again and again in the hope of achieving a different result. It doesn't quite work in this case. But bombing Hamas out of existence seems to me to be, at the very least, over-optimistic. And I found Sunak's rhetoric there quite grim, because the only way you can justify the unjustifiable is by claiming that it will achieve the unachievable. I just made that up, you know. But it's true, isn't it? You can, because if you say it is achievable, it's like the first call we took, claiming that it was all about rescuing hostages, which nobody really contends. But the alternative is to offer up full-throated support for whatever it is that follows. And there are already reports of people on supposedly safe routes coming under accidental fire. And also, you know, we talk so glibly about 1.1 million people moving. That's like your home. That's everything you've got, and you haven't got much, but it's all there. No guarantee you'll ever come back. No guarantee there'll be anything to come back to. You know, you say, well, it's better to get them out of the way before we drop the bombs. Would you rather the civilians were killed? You're talking about them as if they're cattle, you know? And then you look at the events of last weekend and think, I refuse to calibrate my response to these horrors according to the origins of the victim. I refuse to. I will not do that. I can hold Hamas in immeasurably lower regard than Israeli soldiers. Of course I can. They're a death cult. But the people they kill do not bruise my heart more or less than the people that will be killed largely as a consequence of what Hamas did last weekend. So to steer it back, I mean, the broader international response, I should probably have included Humza Yousaf in that, the leader of the Scottish National Party. It's been since 1949 largely in response to indiscriminate bombing campaigns in the Second World War. I presume up to and including Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the Fourth Geneva Convention addressed the issue of collective punishment and the fact that it's not supposed to happen, but my goodness me, it does. What do they call it? Collateral damage in Gulf War II and elsewhere. But the idea that this is being waved through and almost cheered on by elements of the UK media and the UK government is deeply troubling, isn't it? It's deeply troubling. Or maybe you can't expect that from political leaders. They can't do what we do and just sit here sort of communing with each other and sharing our horror at the overall situation. But Sunak has made a decision. He first of all talked about absolute rights, which aren't technically true under international law. There is no absolute right to do anything. That's why laws exist. And now positing Israel's response as being justified by the fact that it will eradicate Hamas. Now, if that were true, we'd have an even more complicated conversation, which would sound a little bit like how many civilians can die, or how many civilians would you accept the death of if the guaranteed eradication of Hamas was the end result? You could have that conversation in logistical terms, algorithmic terms, but you can't, of course. You can't. So you can put the word how or why in brackets at the beginning of this question. Brackets how, brackets why, brackets. Is it important that Israel abides by rules that Hamas holds in complete contempt? Anthony is in Bletchley Park. Anthony, what would you like to say?
I'd like to pay tribute to your call before the news. I thought it was profoundly moving.
Yes, I agree.
I think the reason that I believe that Israel should conduct itself in accordance with the law of armed conflict is precisely because Hamas is hoping it won't. And in the broader context, as I explained to your producer, is that over the last few weeks, Iranian militias and Iraqi militias and Lebanese Hezbollah have been massing their forces on the southwest Syrian border. They've imported arms, ammunition, weapons, missiles, and UAVs. And they are now watching. I was reporting on this morning. They're now watching and waiting to see precisely what Israel does. If Israel unleashes a cataclysmic event in Gaza, that will quite possibly precipitate a war on two fronts. And that will ignite a much broader regional conflict, which Hamas would be perfectly content to. Excuse me. As you rightly point out, they are a death cult. You know, they do want the destruction of Israel. But more broadly, they are fitting into a much more complex game plan where you are seeing the Middle East conflict writ large, which is Iran versus America, still playing out. And so the reason Israel absolutely has to obey the law of armed conflict is because if it doesn't, then the consequences could be unimaginable. It could be absolutely catastrophic.
And there have been... so I was thinking, Anthony, about fight or flight in the simplest of terms, and I think there's an F missing. I think freeze. Fight, flight or freeze. And I think that the atrocities of last weekend were so awful, with the historical context of Holocaust being added into the mix, that we sort of froze. And
can I just interject there? The reason they did the atrocities is they were actually following the Islamic State's playbook.
Yeah.
People don't remember, but in 2014, Islamic State lined up and shot between 1,400 and 1,700 Shia Muslims at a place called Camp Speicher. These were Iraqi Air Force cadets, and they machine gunned them down. I've seen the videos, and I was in Iraq. Right. It's appalling. The reason they did that was they were banking on Baghdad unleashing an appalling retribution, which would then act as a recruiting sergeant to allow more disaffected Sunnis and foreign fighters to flood into Iraq and Syria and create the much broader war that Islamic State wanted so they could build their caliphate. And I think the same logic is applied inside Hamas. They wanted to do as many disgusting things as they could so they would achieve a massive overreaction, and they could then point at it and say, see, the Israelis are butchers, so we are now going to take the war to them.
The only value judgment in what you just said would be with the word over, wouldn't it, in overreaction, because some people would dispute that. But where does that go philosophically? We can't do that because that's what the enemy wants. Well, that could tie everybody's hands forever, couldn't it?
Well, it could, but then you go back to Gandhi, you know, an eye for an eye makes the whole world.
I don't think he ever said that. It was Ben Kingsley in the film.
Great, it's still a classic.
It's a great line. Don't get me wrong, but I think, as with quite a lot of brilliant quotes, yes, it is very true. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
But I go back to your superb caller. I think it was last Thursday or Friday.
Bilal
Bakati, where he pointed out absolutely rightly about Boko Haram is that, you know, the 71% increase in recruitment happened after the security forces overreaction. Is that word overreaction again?
Yeah.
But I subscribe entirely to his theory. I've been studying this for years. If you behave as badly as your enemy, then you are going to achieve nothing more than to create further enemies. And how Israel is going to decapitate Hamas, which is these wonderful words that you see these cretins on social media use. They obviously haven't studied history. They obviously haven't studied military history, and they don't know what.
Well, most people haven't. I haven't, to be fair. So I'm not going to join you.
You're on damn sight more balanced than some of the people who are calling on social media.
Well, that's what social media is for these days. But and it's not just social media. How do you feel when you hear the UK Prime Minister essentially saying that we will wave through almost? I think this is what he said. I'm open to contradiction. We'll wave through almost anything because the end game is the destruction of Hamas. It's like a sort of joker, isn't it? It's like a trump card.
To answer your question, I found it profoundly depressing that somebody could be quite that ignorant about geopolitics.
Yeah.
Because
never mind the Prime Minister.
Well, yes, never mind him, precisely. Yeah. But, I mean, I go back to, he's almost going to the Jesuit motto, isn't it, which is when the end is justified, the means are also justified. And that's not true either. Mm. You can't offer unequivocal support. You can't say, And
that's what it sounds like, isn't it? It sounds like unequivocal support.
I'm actually sure I read somewhere he actually did say we will offer Israel unequivocal support.
Oh, gosh.
And you can't say that. You mustn't, because all that's happened, I was explaining to your producer, I was talking to a lot of my Arab friends, because most of my military career was in the Middle East. So I was chatting to my Arab friends about it over the weekend. And they were saying, how is it that the West has withdrawn from the Middle East. And this is part of the problem. And in fact, Rory Stewart alluded to it.
Yes.
When we scrapped DFID, it was the single most stupidity in terms of our ability to project soft power that has ever existed inside government. Because in one fell swoop, we stopped having the ability to talk about international development and engage with foreign partners. And by doing that, it showed the world that we weren't interested anymore. Because if you think about England now, we're terribly parochial. We're always inward looking. It's all about us. Actually, it's not. The world is interconnected. It's all about everybody else, as this Middle East conflict is going to prove. Because if you do get a massive conflagration out there, what's going to happen? Oil prices are going to rise. When the oil prices are going to rise, what happens? Petrol pumps prices are going to rise.
It's isolation. Yeah, isolationism is always ridiculous, isn't it? But
yes,
the more the world turns, the more modern, interconnected the world becomes, the more ridiculous it appears. And just to insert one of my personal bugbears into the conversation, the reason why DFID, or the Department for International Development was closed down was largely because of the same reason why our prisons are overflowing, because it was government political decisions taken to appease right-wing tabloid idiots who were banging on about Malawian Spice Girls or why are we buying condoms for Ethiopians, whereas in fact what the Department for International Development, as anyone who paid even the slightest attention to the facts rather than the deliberate attempts to stoke up ignorant feelings, would have known was it did exactly the sort of stuff that you're referring to.
Precisely. And if you go back to why we should be buying condoms for Malawians, all the rest of it, it's because one of the main problems that we've got on migration at the moment is because of the global north has ignored the global south to its peril. In the sense that our complete inability, this is going for the tangent, our complete ability to understand about climate change is creating the conditions which are causing massive droughts in Somalia and Sudan, which are forcing people north and they're coming across to Europe, because they want a better life. But that's part of the function of us ignoring the interconnectivity of things. That goes back to your point, or our point, about why Israel ought to obey international law, because if you don't do that, then the whole house of cards falls. It crumbles. We will be... I was nearly going to make you press your button then. We'll be up the proverbial street without a paddle.
And there is, in some of the coverage, and more of it outside the UK actually, that is beginning to be recognised. The Daily Mirror this morning has the front page fears of an all-out war. Israel is facing a fight on three fronts. What would a correct response look like then, if that's not too massive a question to hit you with at 11:15 on a Monday morning?
We have to define correct for a start. I would say an appropriate response would be to stop military operations. They should call a ceasefire, and they should get the UN in, because the United Nations is still an important body. And in the absence of anything else, I go back to what your previous caller talked about, and also Bilala talked about. We've got to talk to people. And the thing is that the only way you can change people's minds is by talking to them. You cannot bomb people into changing their minds. It doesn't work. But
Hamas is as you said at the outset. Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of Israel, to the eradication of Israel. So and they're charter states, So how can go on?
But Hamas takes its guidance from Tehran. Is as simple as that.
Okay. Yes,
and
I understand.
The leader of Hamas is currently sequestered in Qatar. And the reason Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, went there on his six-country mega tour, like whirlwind diplomacy, just like Kissinger did, was because Qatar has now agreed to freeze the $6 billion in assets which were passed from South Korea into Qatar, which were meant to be part of the prisoner exchange when they released 5 US prisoners in Iran, and the US will then give $6 billion back to Iran because it was part of their assets which were frozen. Now, by Blinken going to Qatar, they have now refrozen those assets. And so Tehran is now in a fix because they were banking on that money because they're suffering under US sanctions anyway, which started to be imposed by Trump back in 2015-16. So the reason you need to talk to people like Tehran is you need to be able to convince them. And they are convincible. Bear in mind they signed the JCPOA, which is a nuclear treaty, which is one of the reasons Israel hates them.
Right.
If you can talk to them and say, look, if you do this, this is what the outcome is going to be. You're going to see a broader Middle East conflict. You are going to see worse sanctions on Iran. You're going to see your people suffer. You're going to see your regime even potentially topple. If you look at the protests that happened after the death of Mahsa Amini, who was the Kurdish girl who was killed by the Iranian morality police. Yeah, they had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. The regime was terrified. The IRGC was deployed. They closed their borders, and that was for the death of one woman. Can you imagine what the potential would be if a Middle East conflict starts brewing, with people turning around saying, do you really want us to do this?
Yeah. Well, you've covered a hell of a lot of ground there, Anthony, and I'm very, very grateful to you for educating me and most people listening. But not a lot of grounds for optimism, though. Go on.
I don't think that I would. I'm always wary, especially after nearly 3 decades in the system, of using words like optimism. But there is hope, and hope comes from actually talking to people. I'll give you a classic example. Look at the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah. I was thinking about that last night, actually. I served multiple times in Northern Ireland, and I spoke to all kinds of horrible and unsavoury people on both sides of the sectarian divide, which is well worth noting because it's a bit, it's similar to overlooked a bit, doesn't it?
Yes, it is, and of course one of the other problems we got is that people are assuming that what we're seeing is a clash between Jews and Islam. You're not.
No.
Gaza might be Muslim. And Israeli might be Jewish state. But this isn't a war between Judaism or Zionism and Islam. This is a terrorist organisation which has attacked a democratic country. It's a religion. The reason they're doing it is because Hamas are... avoid the button again. Yeah. Hamas are a death cult. All they want to do is destroy Israel because that's what they say they're going to do. But this is not a war of faith.
No, I hear you. And in fact, as you referred to the caller just before the news, Joe Berry, it was indeed the Good Friday Agreement that laid the groundwork for her to break bread with the man who planted the bomb that killed her father. So, Anthony clearly knows of what he speaks, and I'm grateful to him for doing so. But treating us, actually, I would use that verb to his analysis. It's always very valuable. It is just coming up to 11:20. It is 23 minutes after 11. I wasn't even aware of a complaint on this one. Some breaking news. This headline here is so jarring, and I'm going to actually wait until I've seen it reported somewhere else. I've only got the Daily Mirror reporting it at the moment, so it looks like there might be another by-election on the way in a previously safe Tory seat, and it I don't know. Do you know that? Since Elon Musk bought it, I found Twitter to have completely lost. In fact, on a much, 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 much more serious note, the events of last week proved it. Where once a blue tick on what is now called X would provide some semblance of security that you were looking at a trustable source, even if the blue tick had been achieved by celebrity in a field that's got nothing to do with current affairs. They generally weren't dished out to complete weapons with absolutely nothing of use to say, and a deep and abiding affection for complete lies, racist propaganda, and gibberish, disinformation, because now it's monetized as well. So you put up something that's not true. Farage, for example, put up a claim about a man being arrested for carrying a flag that was a blatant lie, addressed by the Metropolitan Police. But hey-ho, no consequences for creepy Uncle Nige. On he goes. Wherever he's working these days, there'll be no consequences or punishments there. You can address 1 billion people on social media from a verified Twitter account with a blatant lie about what's going on in the capital city of the country that an insightful lie, a provocative lie, that the Metropolitan Police refute absolutely. But hey, it's a living these days. You can do it. So I just saw a story about a Tory MP facing a 6-week Commons ban, and the description of what it was for just made me think that can't be true. I'm going to have to wait and see until it's been reported elsewhere, because someone might have put together like a fake account that looks like a reputable news source. But no, Lewis Goodall's tweeted it as well, so it must be true. Lewis, of course, with you later on the newsagent. So Peter Bone, remember him? Peter Bone is facing a 6-week suspension from the House of Commons after ruling by the independent expert panel found he was guilty of bullying and sexual misconduct. The Daily Mirror headline goes a little further and talks about indecent exposure. So there it is. We'll probably catch up a little bit more detail on that story shortly. But who could have possibly thought that Peter Bone might be a bit dodge? 25 after 11 is the time. Mark's in Chichester to steer us back to the altogether more serious conversation underway since 10 o'clock this morning. Mark, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
Thank you for taking my call.
Very welcome.
I just wanted to give a a slightly balanced view in the context of the fact that I'm a Jewish person, not religious, but my grandparents escaped from pogroms in Poland and came to England in 1918 after escaping from Poland, which was under Russian annexation then.
Right.
Now, I just want to say, and I agree with you, that Israel should really have some restraint after what Hamas did last weekend, the weekend before, which was absolutely terrible, abhorrent.
Yeah.
They had a lot of Western support. And if they now go
You mean from individuals and citizens, not from government?
From citizens.
Yes,
there was a lot of horror.
I don't know how much there was, but we definitely saw some.
Exactly. Now, I think they should take the higher moral ground and keep that on their side. If they go in and start killing a load of civilians, then one, it's going to explode the situation, and you're going to get Iran, Syria, possibly Egypt, certainly Hezbollah involved. And my concern is that if the Israelis do destroy all of Hamas, then what?
Do you think that's feasible? Yes, and someone else who looks a lot like Hamas but has a slightly different name will move into that power vacuum. Surely,
exactly.
Well, so what? I mean, how? Because we don't know, and we've had the benefit of some amazing callers in the last few days. But how is it in any way possible that they could eradicate Hamas from the bottom up as opposed to from the top down, without leaving? I mean, even. Can they eradicate it at all? And then the second question becomes: could it happen without doing what you've just described, and a whole new generation, whatever they choose to call themselves, dedicated to lifelong enmity of Israel?
No, I totally agree. And of course, Hamas, as everyone has said on your programme, is committed to destroying the state of Israel. Israel are in the precarious situation of having an extremely right-wing government under Netanyahu, which has a lot of the control with ultra-religious Jewish people. They've been pushing on the West Bank, and a lot of the army, allegedly, has been taken away from securing Gaza and been supporting the West Bank settlements. I feel, and this is my personal feeling, that the hostages, as a US Navy SEAL called James Carr, who's written a load of very interesting books, says that these are unfortunately collateral damage.
Already.
Israel is not bothered about them. It's using this as an excuse for going into Gaza.
Well, I don't even think it's a very good excuse. I know we had an earlier caller making that point, but all of the Israeli media I've seen would be in agreement with the chap that you've just quoted, largely because it would be impossible to explain how exactly this is going to work. It's not like going into the Iranian embassy, is it? Where you've got one destination with a clear and present threat. This is millions of.
Of course not. And the Hamas fighters, they're young Palestinians. If Egypt opens the border, or the civilians are going south, what's stopping them just taking off their bulletproof vests and blending in?
I've never understood this bit either. I mean, the idea. No. So it does. I mean, the more you unpick it, the harder it becomes to see it in the terms that Israel want it to be seen. But then you've got our own Prime Minister saying that They can essentially do whatever you want because getting rid of Hamas is whatever the price you pay, whatever the price Palestinians pay, it's a price worth paying to get rid of Hamas.
James, it's total madness.
I think you're right.
It's total, and unfortunately, the right wing is, and I'm trying to have a very balanced view of this, is that the Israeli government under Netanyahu, who, let's be honest, is trying to sack all the supreme judges and put his own cronies in to prevent him being convicted of corruption. Now, that's a fact. The ultra-religious Jewish people on the right side that are supporting him have also said they don't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state
No Palestinian state. No Palestinian state.
Now, the thing is, look,
I'm late for the news, but I
way,
want you to finish. I want you to get
this, it's like one sentence. The only way this is ever going to be settled, James, as we know, is if there's dialogue and some sort of two-state solution comes out of it, so that everyone is happy.
And I suppose extreme beliefs exist in diametrically opposed places, don't they? I know I said I was late for the news, but whenever someone says what you said at the beginning of the call, it always haunts me slightly. I don't know why. When you said I'm Jewish, I'm not a religious Jew. And the reason why it haunts me is because the SS wouldn't have cared, would they? No,
of course not. Of course not. But any extreme of religion basically is the same. I hate to say, you look at the Roman Catholic religion, going back to 1600s. The Spanish Inquisition.
No one's expecting the Spanish Inquisition.
No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. So it's the same as any
well, it is. I think this is one of my pet subjects as well. That people use it as people who want to do terrible things will pick up anything as an excuse or a rationale to let them do terrible things. And the idea that any religion has a monopoly on that historically is patently absurd. Thank you, mate. That was really helpful for me. I hope you feel vented, if that's the right word. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. I don't do this often on the programme. 11:36 is the time. I'm going to apologise to Jim, who writes, "Blimey, James, you really need to give out trigger warnings before breaking a news story. I nearly crashed my car, Peter Bone." And you had something I probably won't repeat on the radio. Henry Riley is here to bring us up to date with yet another example of a little local difficulty for the Tory party. What do we know, H?
Well, in terms of the politics of it, firstly, James, in practice this could lead to another by-election because this is an independent panel that has recommended a suspension of 6 weeks for Peter Bone. Just to remind your listeners, a very long-standing MP. He's been the MP for Wellingborough for 18 years. He was a former deputy leader of the House of Commons as well in that brief period that Boris Johnson was sort of announced that he'd going before Liz Truss took over.
When he couldn't find anyone to do the job, Peter Bone got a job.
Peter Bone, and actually what was bizarre is that position hadn't been filled before, so there was the Deputy Leader of the House was created for that brief period. But in this particular instance, so it could lead, because it's a 6-week suspension, if approved by the House of Commons, to a by-election in that particular seat. Some pretty worrying, shocking allegations among these. So there are 5 counts of bullying that are allegations at the moment, and 1 of sexual misconduct. In terms of the sexual misconduct, and again, just to warn your listeners, there's some quite graphic details in here. It's in relation to a trip to Madrid. The complainant alleges that the respondent booked a shared hotel room. In the hotel room, the twin beds were together. At one point, essentially Peter Bone, it is alleged, complained that the shower in the bathroom did not seem to be working properly, called the complainant in to look at it. While the complainant was bending down to do that, the respondent dropped his towel. So that is one of the allegations, the sexual misconduct allegations among those as well. There are also various counts of bullying as well. One of them, I'll read you here, James, is the respondent struck the complainant repeatedly on the back of the head, arms, back and shoulders. He used his hand and sometimes an object such as a pen or pencil or a rolled up document. He said the respondent struck the complainant across the back of the head once and said, "Because you're having a thick day and I thought this would help." The respondent would then tell other colleagues in the office, "He's having a thick day, we should hit him." And I mean, James, these allegations actually are from quite a while ago as well. They're from 2012 and 2013. The reason it's taken so long is the complainant went first to the Conservative Party.
Well, this is an interesting element of the report, isn't it? That a rather damning indictment, perhaps, of the Conservatives' processes in this case.
Yes, and it's certainly something that's going to come under increased scrutiny, I think, over the coming days. I mean, it happened in 2012, 2013, the allegations. In 2017 was when the first complaint went into the Conservative Party. The complainant essentially got so frustrated that around the time of 2021, at some point then, they withdrew from the process, instead went to the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme. They started investigating in 2022, so we're well on over 10 years, really, from when these allegations first came to light. So it's extremely worrying. James, it's important to say as well, Mr. Peter Bone does deny these allegations. He says they're false and untrue, they're without foundation. As I've maintained throughout these proceedings, none of the misconduct allegations against me ever took place.
But that is, as you say, it's important to included in your report, but it doesn't alter the political metric in that he is now subject to a recall petition in his constituency.
Yeah, so the technicality is it has to go before the House of Commons, but it's virtually impossible that won't pass because it's been essentially done by this independent body. So it will likely pass in the House of Commons. Then it needs 10% of his electorate in Wellingborough to sign a recall petition, and then potentially in the next couple of months there's another by-election.
So this withdrew. Is it the same complainant in all the allegations?
Yes.
Okay, so they withdrew from the process after the August 2022 reopening and offered up the delays of nearly 5 years with no resolution to his complaint. Stage 1 of the process had seemingly been repeated despite being originally completed in 2018. Information to him from the party that delay was due to administrative error which had caused his file to be lost, and then the process at stage 3 would include a new set of procedures which were not mentioned to him in the early stages of his complaint in 2017 and 2018. It's a mess, isn't it, this?
Yeah, and I mean, they've acknowledged the sort of frustration and disappointment, as their words, of the complainant. I think that's probably quite an understatement. I suspect there's going to be a serious amount of scrutiny. If not, I mean, I would ascertain there's probably going to be some sort of internal inquiry or indeed other sort of inquiry into what's happened here.
Thank you very much indeed, Henry Riley. As you've just heard, I did a double take at that. I don't mean this in a flippant way, because now I've had a look at some more of the detail. It's a grim story from every angle, but the headline, even in these strange times we're living in, it came out of nowhere, didn't it?
What's peculiar is there's been no sort of reporting of this at all. Usually, occasionally with these, you do get sort of a whiff. Journalists do hear about it, and there's been none of that this time.
Henry Riley there with the latest on the findings by the independent expert panel, the report by the independent expert panel on the conduct of Peter Bone, which makes for pretty grisly reading, I have to tell you. It's coming up to 11:42 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got two thoughts about what to do next. I think, and in fact, it was Mark in Chichester mentioning Israeli attempts, or Netanyahu's attempts, Liquid's attempts to muzzle some checks and balances, democratic checks and balances, which traditionally involve the judiciary and the media. It's another little reminder of where we are as a country, with very, very senior politicians routinely attacking the judiciary, routinely attacking judges. And almost all of the media, of course, on side, looking at the details and the dates of this Peter Bone investigation. It unfolded, didn't it? The delay between 2018 and 2022 coincides almost entirely with a period of British politics where the governing party believed that they were allowed to do whatever the hell they wanted, and if they ever got into any trouble, then they could rely upon their friends on Fleet Street and beyond to mount save campaigns, most obviously, of course, in the case of Owen Paterson. So when the boss is behaving with complete impunity and contempt for rules and regulations, it's not perhaps the biggest surprise in the world that the malaise may seep further down the party machine. But listening to Mark in Chichester talk about Netanyahu's attempts perhaps to dilute or neuter checks and balances, I did find myself reflecting upon events in Poland this weekend, where I think, again, our exceptionalism as a country means we probably haven't been tracking things quite as closely as we should have done. That the outpouring of celebration, so it's electorally weird anyway for people like me who grew up in a first-past-the-post system and have never known any different. So the governing party got the biggest share of the vote, but it's not a big enough share of the vote to form a government, because the coalition of opposition parties will, when it's finally confirmed tomorrow, it looks as though the coalition of governing parties will have a majority, and that will put Donald Tusk, who you will remember from his work in the European Union, that will put Donald Tusk in the Prime Minister's office. And it has been described in some of the coverage that I've read as an almost existential election in the context of Polish democracy. Tusk's campaign was to save democracy. The right-wing ruling party, they campaigned, it just all looked a bit UKIP-y. Actually, that's not fair anymore. It all looked a bit second decade of the 21st century Tory party on some of the points they were making. But I think that they were much further to the right with regards to media control and judicial appointments than we are currently. And it occurred to me, there'll be a lot of Polish people listening to this programme, so we can ask you, what does this election mean? How big a deal is it? And what does it mean for your for your home country, your country of origin. 0345 6060 973. Now, we could, glancing at the clock, we could do this without an introduction. Because if we do an introduction, it'll just be me groping around in the dark, trying to find something interesting to say about an election that I've confessed I had failed to appreciate the importance of. So what would be nice is if people who voted was it yesterday and the day before, people who voted on Sunday in the Polish election, or Saturday, can tell me and everybody else listening how important this result is for Poland. And if you want to do that and spare everybody one of my interminable introductions, then you can do it now by dialing 0345 6060 973. If I were to invite you to provide me with an idiot's guide to the importance of this Polish election, I want to make it clear from the start that I am casting myself in the role of the idiot. It is 11:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation takes a slightly unexpected turn. Our first ever, I think, dive into Polish politics. You will be aware of an important election that was well, you'll probably be aware of an election that was unfolding this weekend. You may not be aware of its importance. You may not be aware of it at all. But what I also want is some background on the Law and Justice Party, which is a sort of won but also lost. It would have achieved more seats than any other party, but fewer than in the previous election, and not enough to be able to lead a government that can pass laws in the legislature. This is based on an Ipsos exit poll. Exit polls always reliable, but not guaranteed reliable, of course. There is always a danger that the final count will confound the exit polls, but it seems highly unlikely. The most important campaign, according to many polls, since 1989, when democracy essentially emerged after decades of communism. The turnout this weekend was even higher than it was in 1989. But I also need a little bit of help and guidance on how far had the incumbent party, who still secured more seats than any other, but how far had they gone down what we might loosely describe as far-right roads? Because I think we've taken our eye off the ball a bit on that. The Law and Justice Party's relationships with media and judiciary interest me as well. But the point is this is our first ever Polish politics phone-in. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Suella Braverman. This is a wonderful example of multiculturalism and diversity, or whatever you want to call it, although my understanding of the Law and Justice Party is that they'd be a lot closer to Suella Braverman's position on that sort of issue than they would be to mine. But I love the idea of conducting this conversation in a London studio with people who have one foot in Poland and one foot in the United Kingdom. 11:51 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Let's start with Joanna, who's in Stirling. Joanna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm quite gobsmacked. I didn't think that you were going to tackle this particular subject because it's just so niche for the...
It's not really niche. It's an entire country, Joanna. It's not like we're talking about bungee jumping in a Muppet costume. It's national, not neat, but I know what you mean. You haven't heard much coverage of Polish politics on this programme in the past.
Yeah, okay. Well, yesterday I was in Edinburgh to vote, and I must say I was really surprised by the number of people that turned out, and the atmosphere in the queue was full of hope. Everybody was saying maybe this time we can manage to change things for the better, and you know, these hopes seem to have kind of come to fruition, and I'm hoping that the exit poll results will be confirmed or maybe even improved. I don't know.
Yes.
But
why was it so important? What was at stake?
Yeah, it was big words, and I think Donald Tusk said that in his speech before the election, that this is really the Polish democracy that was at stake. Yes. Because it's been slowly eroded, I think, through all the sometimes small, sometimes big changes that were pushed through by the previous government of the
Law and Justice Party.
Law and Justice Party, yeah. So they started changing lots of different things, starting from the media, the Polish television, the main channel, the national channels, has been all the journalists that were put in. They were the only kind of raison d'être of the journalists was to support the government. So the truth started to be thrown out the window. The most important thing
it was a bit like when Boris Johnson tried to put his old mate in charge of the BBC then, but in Poland they actually managed to pull it off.
Yeah, Britain wasn't as bad. I mean, Poland, it was just a big propaganda channel that only spewed out things that kind of bigged up everything that government did and completely diminished anything else.
Really? But I mean, would there be an LBC?
It was horrendous.
So it would be like watching North Korean television, talking about how wonderful Kim Jong. Really?
Yeah, almost that. Yes. I mean,
that's what I mean by my ignorance. That's what I mean by my ignorance, because this is happening on our doorstep in a country with whom we have, probably a greater tie over the last 100 years than any other country in Eastern Europe and many other countries in Europe. But so you genuinely had a takeover of mass media by government.
Well, yeah, the public media. Fortunately, there was still independent, media that could kind of provide people with some alternative kind of.
And was reality. And were they do they flourish? Are they? I mean, is there an equivalent of LBC, for example?
Yes, I think TVN is probably the biggest private kind of independent station that took over the role of kind of supporting the opposition. And then the judiciary, obviously, there was a lot of pressure on the judges. It's supposed to be independent of the government,
right.
So you'd have the legislature, they would have the executive as a government, and then you'd have the judiciary that would be independent. Kind of all the checks and balances would rest with them. But if the judges feel under pressure from the ruling party and they're kind of scared for the job.
And presumably the right-wing media, then the government-supporting media, would join in with the attacks on the judiciary.
Yes.
Which also sounds oddly familiar to people listening in the United Kingdom. I just found something in reference to what you said, a guy from TVP who was ordered by his bosses to start following an outspoken critic of the ruling party with a drone. So the idea was to send this drone over to his house in order for him to notice it and to feel threatened like he was being watched. An intimidation method straight out of communism. And this was Poland's largest broadcaster essentially doing the bidding of Polish government, Polish politicians.
Another thing that I think was happening was kind of the ruling party was trying to take over most of the institutions and public companies with their people. We have this saying in Polish, the BMW. So that's the first letters of the Polish words passive, mediocre, but faithful. So that would be kind of that would be the people that would be pushed into those roles. And I thought that was just,
so this is a huge deal then. I mean, it is
I think so.
Just talk me through because we often forget that totalitarian regimes or very, very oppressive regimes often achieve power democratically. It's what they do with the power once they've got it that becomes historically questionable. But the ruling party, they won, but they lost. So how do you feel personally about the fact that they still enjoy fairly high levels of support, despite what you've just described to us as unalloyed?
They were a hugely populist party, so they had the propaganda, and I'm afraid, the public television reached out those kind of rural areas a bit more than the kind of private-owned and independent media. So people would listen to all that stuff that they were spewing out. Plus, they were given money because there was a lot of money went out. There was a 500 plus for every child you had. And then they were increased it to 800 plus, it was called. That was the money they were given every time they, but it was a regular payment they were getting if they had children.
Yes.
So people thought they were given a lot of money, and that was, they were saying, that's the only government that actually did something for us, that gave us something. And they were not seeing everything that was happening kind of in the background, so to speak.
And then finally, immigration rhetoric as well, I think, has been key. Because there was a referendum, wasn't there, on immigration? But that, oddly, given the turnout in the election, which was in the 70s, the referendum didn't get enough turnout to actually make the findings binding. So what happened there?
I can tell you, there was a big movement to stop people taking the referendum cards because they were given out together with voting cards. So everybody was kind of pushed, don't take it, because the referendum was written in such a way that they were really rhetorical questions, kind of geared towards people giving certain answers. So people saying we're not taking part in it. So the only way to kind of overthrow it was not to take part by making a statement that you're not accepting the card, and you had to make sure that it was noted on the the register that you refused participation. Also, voting abroad, because I was voting obviously in Edinburgh, there was a big movement not to take the referendum cards for a different reason, because they were only given, I think, 24 hours to count the votes. If they were also counting the referendal cards, they would probably not manage to count all the votes, especially taking the turnout. They were saying, just don't do it. If you want your vote to count,
get the vote counted. Don't worry about the referendum. Crikey, there's a lot going on. A lot of love for your accent coming in, Joanna. How long have you been in Scotland?
Oh, really? 15 years now.
There's a lot of people picking up on the blend of the Scottish and the Polish working together so beautifully. So thank you for that. It's a lovely, it's a perfect analysis actually. And Rory Stewart, of course, has warned that some Conservative politicians, some of his former colleagues, look towards no hostages. Has reminded me of this on Twitter a moment ago. Look towards Poland in particular and Hungary as models of where they want to be, which is why I would remind you that Boris Johnson wanted to put his old crony Charles Moore in charge of the BBC and Paul Dacre, the editor of the Daily Mail, in charge of Ofcom, the broadcast regulators, which is, on the same tactical page as what has happened in Poland, where the bloke they put in charge of making the public broadcaster, and I quote, more Polish, said, "I know the changes we've made aren't popular, but I say to those who don't like what we're doing, win the election next time." Yeah, I think they just did, mate. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to the first ever phone-in on... is it the first ever phone-in on LBC about Polish politics? Or is it just the first one that we've done? Has anyone else done Polish politics as a phone-in? Do we know? Well, in 50 years? Well, yeah, I don't think it's on... Well, don't look at me like that. Find me the evidence. When was it then? So I would say over 50 years, it seems quite likely we might... Oh, we'd have done Solidarność, wouldn't we? We'd have done the Lech Walesa and the toppling of the communists. Would it have worked as a phone-in? I wonder who was in this slot. Probably Brian Hayes back in the day. He used to rip people's head. You think I'm tough. You think people ring me and say, be gentle with me. You should have rung Brian Hayes back in the day on LBC. But, you wouldn't have had the Polish diaspora in this country. So you would have had the Polish community that arrived here during and after the Second World War, but you wouldn't have had the 21st century diaspora. You wouldn't have had the number of Polish people living here. So I bet we've never done a phone-in about a Polish general election. But I could be wrong. Someone will know. Someone will be in touch. And how important was this one and why? Monica and Amelia are up next. But before that, I do think it's important to recognise the parallels of far-right government. This is what they do. So that story I told you about the journalist being asked to fly a drone over an opponent of the political government was part of a piece. And listen to this. The party believes it is fighting an infiltration of liberal European values. So they kind of invented the woke mob, this lot. And it was all spread through foreign-owned media. Since the Law and Justice Party got into office in 2015, it took control of the country's largest public broadcaster and vowed to re-Polonize the national media. Does that sound familiar at all? That's base nationalism. That's base populism. Critics said this was a code for turning them into government propaganda outlets, and as Joanna just described it, that is exactly what happened. And some of the examples of it are frankly astonishing. The blatant nature of it. So TVP is the taxpayer funded. Previously it was editorial independent. So think of it as the BBC and look at the kind of politicians accusing the BBC of being biased. In 2015, after they came to power, Law and Justice began passing legislation that saw a purge of the public broadcaster's editorial leadership. So when Johnson put there were people on the board at the BBC who were constantly complaining about colleagues who are no longer there because they've come to work for us instead. So a purge of editorial leadership and replaced them with party loyalists. Also put the whole organisation under the supervision of something called a National Media Council. Now, she was too stupid to realise what she was doing, but this is precisely the sort of conduct that Nadine Dorries was talking up when she was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. The chairman of the council, a bloke called Krzysztof Szabanski, said that the changes were making the public broadcaster more Polish. So I was talking about this last night. Thank you, Cheltenham, by the way. I had a wonderful time at the Cheltenham Literary Festival last night. A wonderful, wonderful audience. But we were talking a little bit about capture and the fact that the people who are essentially screwing the country are the ones that claim to be patriotic. And that's exactly what they did in Poland. When they were loading the previously impartial national media with government loyalists, they were claiming that they were doing it to make the public broadcaster more Polish. It would be a bit like if the far right had set up a television channel and called it P News, for example, or Poland News, claiming that they have some sort of claim to patriotism, while really all they're peddling is propaganda, racism, and slavish support for a very right-wing government. And he actually said it out loud. He said, I'd prefer, regardless of political colouring, if we had Polish capital in Poland's media market. I know the changes we've made aren't politically popular with some in the opposition, but I say to those who don't like what we're doing, win the election next time. And that's a Polish appointee, essentially using the same rhetoric that Johnson loyalists would have used when he was trying to put Paul Dacre in charge of Ofcom and Charles Moore in charge of the BBC. You can read more about all of this in my new book, How They Broke Britain, which is out on November the 2nd. And it was the first event I've done last night. I started getting quite excited. Anyway, back to Poland. Monica's in Lewisham. Monica, how important was this election and why?
Hi, first time caller here, so I'm a bit nervous.
It's only me. How do I say it's only me in Polish?
To tylko ja.
Okay, I'll leave that one with you. Thank you.
Right. It's an extremely important election in Poland. It's probably the highest stake election since the fall of communism in 1989. I was too young to vote then, but I was old enough to vote now, and I think it was a privilege and my duty to vote. It's because I was so worried. I was terrified that Poland would leave the EU.
God.
And frankly, the entire family thought, okay, so basically in a few years' time we would have to move somewhere in the EU just to make sure that we've got EU passports because they're so important. And, we're used to moving, so we moved here 16 years ago. I love this country, I have to be honest. And I know that you're the chief complainer, and I absolutely agree with you on so many points.
It's because I love the country that I'm the chief complainer.
Exactly, and I love it. I think you're doing a great job. But I still think that living here, to be honest, it's still better.
Yes, absolutely.
Because, okay, with all the faults of Britain, I just feel more free here. And now this is changing. I'm proud to be Polish again. Okay. And I'm so hopeful for the future. I think Poland might stay in the EU, should stay. If Tusk is in charge, I think he'll bring Poland closer to the EU. It will be much easier to mend the relationship that has been, almost broken now. And Poland has lost its significance in the EU, and it should be more significant. It's the 5th largest country.
There's billions of euros on the table as well, isn't there, that has been withheld because of the democratic erosion that we've been discussing. How has it been to have a foot in both countries and to recognise, because, in the run-up to the referendum, people were talking about Polish expats all the time, and they were talking...
No, hang on, not expats, bloody immigrants.
I was joking. I was going to go, you just stolen the punchline to my... No, but you're right. They were talking about Polish bloody immigrants all the time, and the next line I was going to say was not always in the most flattering light, Monica, but I think
I'm sorry,
it's absolute... No, it's not. I'm talking about you. You decide what words are used. But so everyone was a kind of expert on Polish people up until the referendum result came in, and yet a lot of what's been going on in Poland since 2015 has not really been reported here at all. Has it been odd to be living in that sort of duality?
I feel like a hybrid creature in a way.
Yes.
My daughter feels British, but at the same time, she has Polish roots.
Yes, of course.
But for me, it really matters. It's actually quite odd because I hadn't thought that it would matter to me so much.
No.
I thought, okay, you know what, I'm here. I can't be bothered anymore. I'm fed up. And then suddenly I find myself staying up all night, until 3 a.m. And watching what's going on in Poland, and I still couldn't believe it. And I'm not really a big drinker, but I actually had a bit of, just to celebrate. I just couldn't believe it, honestly. I just looked at it, and I almost cried. Well, I actually cried. I'm sorry. I'm not really a very sentimental person.
Well, this isn't sentiment. This is much deeper than that. This is a pure emotion, and there was a lot at stake. And again, probably my bugbear, or my hobby horse rather, to see echoes with some of the political figures and public figures in this country, but it was a culture war as well, wasn't it? Because LGBTQ plus rights, abortion rights, and the foreign alliances, even support for Ukraine, and all of these were in the mix in this vote.
But it was also a fight between how should I put it, positivity and negativity.
Yes.
Because Tusk and his people, my people in a way. I've never been a fan of Tusk, but now I recognise his role in the whole process. He portrayed Poland as a friendly, happy country, whereas the other side, and I'm saying, well, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't. Well, it's my personal opinion.
Yes.
The other side was more about protecting Fortress Poland and more about hate. And this vitriol that you could see in the discourse, it was just it was terrifying. Yeah. Anti-EU, anti-immigrants, portraying them as them.
That kind of outlook will never catch on.
I know. I know, but still, it wasn't. They didn't stoop to that. The UK didn't stoop to that level.
No.
So what happened is they won, yes. But it's a Pyrrhic victory, because if you look at, the turnout is absolutely unbelievable. Almost 73% people.
It's breathtaking.
And the young, they
So it would be generational and geographical then, in part?
Absolutely,
right.
yes. So, and also women. I think it's really important to not forget about the women and the abortion as a subject in the whole. For so many years, it has become a very, very important subject in Poland. And to be honest, one of the reasons why I couldn't imagine moving to Poland is because I've got a daughter, a young daughter.
Yes.
I mean, how can I do it to her? I've spoken to a colleague recently, and we talked about having daughters in Poland. And she said, you know what, I've got a list of doctors that I can approach just in case. And I said, well, it's not really normal, is it? I mean, you should be able to go to a hospital and not be worried that you would be incarcerated just because they think you might have had an abortion.
Yeah. That's incredible. I didn't know that. I know similar. It's like the rejection of Roe versus Wade in America. It's happened in the same time window, hasn't it? And it always goes.
She's in Warsaw. She's in Warsaw. It's easier for her. And imagine how it is for all those young women. Well, not just young women, but women, reproductive age women, who are, I don't know, in smaller towns and villages.
Of course.
It's absolutely horrendous, and they don't really have much choice. And, the refusal to sell you contraceptives, the morning after pill. I don't think I want to dwell on that because I think your listeners might be appalled. But what's happening in Poland when it comes to women is just...
Well, they go hand in hand throughout history, don't they? When you unleash the sort of nativist forces and the anti-foreigner or the nationalist forces, the sexual autonomy of women is always next on the hit list. It's bizarre. It's like night following day. I hadn't realised it had gone so far. So I understand. I'll tell you what, Monica. I understand why you had a little drink last night.
My husband drank a little bit more, so I feel fine.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you so much. This is absolutely fascinating for me and for everybody listening. 12:16 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we examine the importance and the significance of the election result, the expected election result in Poland. And of course, talking a bit about British newspapers and what have you, you've already got organs, alleged newspapers like the Express, trying to attack Donald Tusk, which says it all, really. 19 minutes after 12. Still no word on whether there's ever been a phone-in on LBC before about a Polish election. I'd like to think that we were once again pioneers, breaking new ground, changing the rules, pushing the envelope, But I could be wrong. And it is a fascinating one. I don't know about you, but I'm on an absolute crash course on this. I had no idea that I mean, of course, historically, it's almost inevitable that when you start off with racism, you move pretty quickly onto sexism and misogyny. But some of the other tactics of populism are very arresting as well. The kind of encouragement to have bigger families by making payments. I suppose we should be thankful that in this country the Tories went in the opposite direction, didn't they, and actually removed child support payments for people who have more than 2 children. But this referendum was going to be on migration, the retirement age, lots of other issues, and it's failed completely because the participation level was too low to make the results legally binding. It will also be a relief for Kyiv, the result in Poland. So relations with EU and the squeezing out of the far-right Confederation Party that campaigned on an anti-Ukraine message. I mean, if we didn't get a loud enough wake-up call in the UK after seeing what could happen in America, then seeing what's happening in some of our European allies, notably Poland and Hungary, should possibly have driven the point home. But Poland, it would appear, is 21 minutes after 12 is heading back into the light, if that's a fair way of putting it. Amelia is in Hereford. Amelia, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Hi. Hi again. When I said to you last night that hope to speak to you again, I didn't mean to speak to you tomorrow. but I'm really glad.
I need to clarify, Amelia, that you very kindly came to my event at Cheltenham Town Hall last night. We weren't having any secret assignations or anything like that. So no, I thought it was a figure of speech when we said we'd talk tomorrow. But here we are actually talking. That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for actually talking about the situation in Poland, about this election, because it is very important. And I think it's very often overlooked here in the UK, the situation. We very often look at the other side of the pond. We look sometimes at our French neighbours, but very rarely we look at the centre and Eastern Europe. Whilst it is quite important because as you quite rightly make those analogies, that some of that populistic trends, the same textbook, I always call it a Bannon-Orban textbook, it just makes rounds. And basically, it is the same sort of thing being played out over and over again in different places. And those people, they do meet, and we don't even hear about it. So, for example, I know for a fact that there are those things called family congresses.
Yes.
That come from the U.S., that are sponsored by the big U.S. money, far-right money. And in cooperation with the evangelicals and Polish Roman Catholic Church, who, by the way, goes hand in hand with this far-right government. And earlier on, sorry, because I will be making loads of pop-ups.
You take your time. Take your time, Amelia, seriously.
Yeah, when you said earlier on in the program about the ultra-religious organization, and somebody mentioned Roman Catholic, Spanish Inquisition, and I thought, no, that's not right. I just spoke to myself, out loud, because we've got right now an Roman Catholic Church in Poland, and very much influencing the politics over there, very much influencing all the cultural, social changes, and it's sponsored by the American money.
Right.
And that's the talk we hear over here more often as well, about those traditional family values,
Yes.
Obviously, the massive pullback on women's rights, and LGBTQ rights as well. So that's what is happening under the surface. And Poland and Romania, as far as I'm aware, they are massive ground of that fight for the souls and bodies of people over there.
And it must be odd to be to have, as I said to Joanna earlier, to be watching political discourse in this country, which you're heavily engaged with, while conscious that we're largely completely ignorant of what's going on back in Poland?
It is a little bit weird. But,
yes.
On the other hand, I'm myself personally, I'm just trying to do my bit, and I very often, my friends would confirm, I would post about those things that are happening in Poland in comparison and making analogies to what is happening over here, because I think those things over there very much inform those things that are going to happen over here. Just, I think my idea is you said something last night about the Faragization of the politics over here.
Of the Tory party in particular.
Of the Tory party. I call it Americanization. I know that it's a very broad term, but I think most of those things, they came from the States, and that's been played in Hungary, Poland right now. But because I think, in a way, Britain was kind of fossilized for much longer, those things are happening much later here.
Yeah, maybe.
So I think for that reason, people should look more often onto the central. So that gives us hope, basically, right now. Yes.
Yes,
because
of course.
We are winning the election. So, oh my God, I'm so happy, James.
I'm glad. I know.
I cannot. I cannot contain myself. If that is going to happen, that will be 2 very painful months, because obviously they are not going to concede so easily, and are still the leading winning party. So the president, who is from the same party, he's going to call them to form the government.
Sure.
Which are obviously are not going to.
Well,
to
if the arithmetic holds. If the arithmetic holds, it will collapse, won't it? But they won't give up without trying. I don't. I mean, I don't think they'd go full Trump, would they, and claim that they'd actually won?
Probably not. Although they will be using all sorts of tricks, probably imaginable.
They claim the voting machines were rigged. Really. We could be getting I shouldn't be glib because it's so important. Can I read you something and ask for your opinion?
Yeah, go on.
Because this is from Rob in Southampton, and it's a very moving text. He says, "My wife, who I love dearly, is a Polish PIS supporter, so that's the Law and Justice Party."
Oh, my Lord.
Well, wait. She gets all her Poland news from internet radio and TV channels that are even more obedient to PIS than the state broadcaster. They really hate Tusk. They paint him as a Russian-German stooge. Yeah. My wife would say that TVN is German-owned, so can't be trusted. Law and Justice play on the extreme nationalism and strong Catholicism, which you just touched on. They've encouraged larger families by making generous payments to parents. And the referendum, alongside the main vote, was to scare people about immigration. So Rob that's a tough position that Rob finds himself in. What advice would you give him, if you don't mind me asking?
I really cannot give him any advice, because I've been maybe not in a similar, but in a way, I don't know nobody from the closest of my family, luckily for me. So I'm feeling very sad and sorry for Rob.
Yes.
But my auntie, who is the oldest family member, and I always considered, her politics. She has been a political animal, and she's 82. And the very last time we spoke, it was on the phone, and I knew that her politics kind of got very conservative with her aging, and I was trying to avoid it really, really hard. But she attacked me furiously, and the arguments were you wouldn't just imagine. It's that kind of going into the rabbit hole.
Yes,
it's the conspiracy theories. So exactly.
And it's moved.
It's that murderer of the whole government. You remember
you remember those years ago when this plane with the president and
his brother.
It crashed.
Yes.
Obviously, that was the fault of the pilot. I cannot even. But they made it exactly as it happened with Brexit here or the stolen election. That was the big, massive lie, being the beginning of the story of peace. So basically, they made it. That was the very start. So they made it into the murder. Basically, Tusk was at. I don't know how. But Tusk and Putin together, they killed
wanted
them,
to take out the Polish president, and that's migrated, has it, from internet and Facebook? That's migrated into more traditionally respectable media sources. So people might now see it on their televisions and their radios or something.
So basically, because Polish, you mentioned that it is the public broadcaster.
Yes.
I think there is a slightly different. So Polish TVP, it's more like a state broadcasting.
Okay, got you.
So basically, it has always been this way that whoever got in power was kind of overtaking, but nobody was really taking that sort of advantage that those people did.
So they just they took it and ran much further with it than anybody had previously. And it's I mean, again, you'll have spotted this already, Amelia, but you know, tycoons setting up television stations in this country, hemorrhaging £30 million a year of money and paying Jacob Rees-Mogg fortunes to spout his talking points, some of which tally completely with the Law and Justice Party in Poland. You have to wonder why they're doing that, if not to effect a similar corruption of public discourse that you've just described as happening in Poland. So, you know, although they are largely hilarious, there's a sinister subtext in play quite often on these things as well. Amelia, thank you, and thank you for your kind words last night. Thank you for coming last night. Tim Humphries here now with your headlines. 25 to 1 is the time. You can't really do dedications on phone-in shows, can you? It's not like a music, so this one's going out for... but this is for Greg in Harrow and others, obviously, this conversation, some of whom have already contributed. He says, I can't believe it, James. You're having a conversation about Poland. I'm Polish-born. I've listened to you since the days of the Basically alarm, so literally since your first day on LBC. I watch Polish news once a day, always the independent stations. Today I switched on TVP1, the government-run news station. They had 2 minutes on how farmers had voted, big majority over the opposition parties, and then after 2 minutes they switched to apple farmers, chickens and pigs. It was hilarious. The independent stations are covering the elections all day long. I'm in touch with friends and family in Poland today. It's a big win. Well, better late than never, Greg. I suppose. If you think the Polish people feel a bit left out by some of our programming, imagine how Scottish people feel. It's only relatively recently that we've recognised the importance of covering Scottish politics properly. But I also appreciate that I'm on in Scotland. It's part of the measured audience, whereas Poland, of course, isn't. But so many Polish people here, you have a sense. I mean, did you see how many voting stations there were in the UK at the weekend? It was incredible to see. And so hardly surprising that many people are keen to contribute to this conversation. Adam is in Nottingham. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James, it's Adam. But
are you not Polish?
Well,
because I was doing a very cheeky thing there. I was slipping in my Polish familiarity because one of my best friends at school was Polish, and he always said that his mum used to call him Adam, not Adam. So I did the Polish
Adam.
Pronunciation. Well, I've got it wrong anyway, but I thought I'd subtly do the Polish pronunciation, and you'd come on and say, "Gosh, James, may I congratulate you on your Polish pronunciation?" But you did the polar bloody opposite, man.
No, because I'm actually I was born and bred in the UK.
Right.
I'm a third generation Pole, but I have Polish nationality.
Gosh.
As well, so I was able to vote yesterday.
Excellent.
So I'm on a different type of view, but yeah. So yes, I did vote yesterday in Nottingham. Waited about 3 hours to get to the phone.
Gosh, why was it so important to you?
I think I go to Poland most years anyway.
Right.
And I think what the biggest shock you will see is if you actually go there, look at the Polish television.
Yeah.
The actual news channel itself, it is unbelievable. The propaganda is absolutely frightening. I would probably put it.
Go on, give me some examples. Give me an idea.
Okay, right. So if you look at the TVP, the news, it was always attacking Donald Tusk.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
So it makes it an even bigger achievement in the context of that weighted against him.
Absolutely. So, you could go on to Google and Google TVP anti-Tusk, and that will give you a flavour of the headlines, which you'll be seeing on Polish media.
So this would be a bit like the BBC pursuing the Daily Mail's editorial line on Keir Starmer or
absolutely,
or Jeremy
Absolutely,
Corbyn.
Absolutely. So you have things like pro-Russian politics of Donald Tusk. It'd be focused on Donald Tusk. It'll be focused on the EU. Also on anti-German propaganda as well. So there are certain ones where you say the European elite will tolerate neo-Nazis, and that would be a headline. Yep. Or you've got another one, shocking anti-Poland policies for Donald Tusk, or Donald Tusk is attacking Poland. And what tends to happen. Because that is a media broadcaster. And it was really hard to see because it was my in-laws in particularly who are heavily Catholic, heavily, really, really sort of, really good people, to be honest, James. But what you would sort of hear is, oh, no, well, yeah, we're being taken over by the Germans. The EU are not allowing us to do X, Y, Z. The immigrants are coming over to take over our country.
Our everything. Our jobs, our people, our women, our houses, you name it. Our cars. So, I mean, it does sound familiar, though, doesn't it, to you, as someone following the news in this country as well?
It does, but this is really why, as a mainstay of the BBC, we have to basically fight for its independence and basically not allow that to happen, because seeing what's actually happened there in Poland and how it feeds into that minority, into basically, the old generation, it is really frightening, James. And that was one of the principal reasons why I needed to vote to get. They had almost, shall we sort of say, four overall strategies. So number one was to basically target a select electorate.
Yeah.
That was basically the Catholic vote. It was supposed to be the old Catholic vote, similar to the UK, the 30%. Get that base together. Yeah. Then we take over the media. We basically have these nationalist themes. So we'll attack the EU, we'll attack Germany, we'll attack immigrants. Will make people scared, so we have to vote for you. Not only that, because we've targeted the Catholics, we'll also basically have those divided Catholic issues.
Right.
So when you've got things like anti-gay propaganda, anti-LGBT propaganda...
And this is government-sponsored?
This is government-sponsored, absolutely. Right. And when you actually... and then what will also happen is after the news, you will have certain political debates. But obviously, it's been loaded. It's been loaded with presenters who are pro-peace.
Just so people who know, peace is PIS, which is the Law and Justice Party. No, they're not pro-peace. I just thought I better clarify that for someone who's just tuned in. What's wrong with peace, man? What have you got against peace, you freak? No, go on.
Yeah.
So they manufacture consent in a way, or they and we're seeing that happen on little watched television stations here, but that it seems that they've got a bit of it seems that they're following a playbook that you, as someone following Polish politics, recognise all too well.
Absolutely. And this is the thing. And the other big frightening thing was when I was actually in Poland in holiday in August. I heard the news of the referendum, and I was shocked, and I automatically knew that what they were trying to do is trying to bring as many people, stir up that sort of nationalistic pride to basically turn up to the elections.
Oh, blimey. Okay, so you might not be able to get people to the polling booths for an election, but if you tell them it's a referendum that will determine our country's future, then they're going to be more likely to turn up and stick a cross in both boxes.
Absolutely. That was the whole point, and that's why it was done on the very same day. And when
that backfired horribly then, didn't it?
Well, the thing is... Well, it did, but this is, I think one of your earlier callers basically admitted it to it. What would end up happening is, at the Polish booths, you had the choice of having your three electoral forms. So one for the general election, there was one for the election of the state senate, and the third one was for the referendum papers.
Right.
So what would end up happening is you could actually refuse one of those papers.
Okay.
So what would end up happening is the peace or the coalition of the Tusk supporters would refuse those the referendum papers.
Right.
So essentially, what you would have is less than the 50%, which would invalidate it. And actually, the other thing which you will find is if you actually look at the actual distribution of the replies, you've got 98. It's almost something like 97, 98% in favour of those questions.
So the only people that engaged in it are the people who were doing the bidding of peace, as it were.
Yeah. So the litmus test, and that would basically, if you look at it this way, 98% to 40% will give you about 36%, which is what
back to that base that rump, isn't it, that they calculate they can govern with, despite the fact that the huge majority of the population would be at best unhappy and at worst repelled by what comes in. I mean, I think it's understandable today that there is a sense of celebration in the air, but it is. It's a long, hard path ahead for Tusk if and when he does form a government.
Yes, so that's absolutely the case. There's going to be the fight. There's going to be a fight in the of the life, because again, I was a little kid, and I was actually in Poland in 1989. Actually, believe it, on holiday, when the Communist Party actually fell down. There was a little joke saying that we came over and we broke communism for some reason. So, but what unfortunately, I think there's some lessons which we can learn from 1990, and I think there will be probably a big purge happening. Probably, that was what my guess would be, similar to what the purge of the communists in 1990, 1991, and because essentially to get everything out, everything more civilised. Unfortunately, that's the way it'll have to be.
And there'll be a he said, she said kicking off. So even if the new government try and bring in people to restore editorial independence or to move back towards it, they'll be accused of having heavy biases in the opposite direction. And the coalition that Tusk will preside over is far from homogenous, Adam, as I understand it. Veering from quite straight textbook socialism right through to people who were nibbling at the edges of peace anyway.
Yeah, and you've got to also understand that Peace and the coalition platform, or back in 2013, were actually coalition partners.
Right, gosh.
So it was right and centre coalition, and so that's moving now from that sort of coalition.
So the middle bit has moved to the left, but it's still. Yeah. Well, this is fascinating. I feel I could almost conduct a radio phone-in about Polish politics now, Adam, having listened to you and my other callers. Yeah. I'm almost qualified to do it. I've got to crack on. Go on. Last word, because I sense you want to say something.
The last thing I want to think is there's lessons which need to be learned, and we've got to apply it to the UK. Yeah, and what I'll probably sort of say is we all have to vote. everybody young thing. We have to vote. We have to make our votes count. And if we want change, we as the electorate can only make it change. So,
it's very nicely put. And I love the way you've got your investment in both countries so clear and so knowledgeable as well. I would benefit. We're lucky to have benefited from it and all the calls today. Thank you, mate. It's 12:47.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 12, and it is time for Mystery Hour, like the man said, and it is your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on the radio. People ring. Look, it doesn't sound amazing if you're new to it. I say people ring in with questions and other people ring in with answers. But not only is it incredibly... Well, I hope it's not that entertaining today. Is that bad? Can we do a very serious Mystery Hour so that my rib doesn't hurt and you make me laugh? Or, God forbid, that I laugh at my own jokes, as has occasionally been known. There is usually a guarantee, as Keith has just... Thank you, Keith. I normally like to guarantee that you will have at least one laugh out loud moment between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock on a Thursday, but I'm not sure I'm capable of a laugh out loud moment at the moment. We shall. So let's try and not make it one of the very silly and frivolous Mystery Hours. Okay, let's try and make it a bit more serious. Like that's ever going to work. I think we'll crack straight on. Don't forget the board game. I was looking at some of the reviews last night. It's about 4.5 stars on Amazon, and there's loads of them there. And what you have to remember is anything I sell on Amazon, you get a few racists turning up to claim that it's awful, even though they probably can't really read books or understand the rules of the incredibly simple Mystery Hour board game. So you can probably give yourself another half a star for that at least. But it's a brilliant game, and you can get your own copy at mysteryhour.co.uk. Or you can win it by being my favourite contributor, which this week will involve not making me laugh. I can safely say that I don't think I'll be giving the Mystery Hour board game this week to the person who makes me laugh the most. Full terms and conditions are available at lbc.co.uk. It's 5 minutes after 12. David is in Surbiton. David, question or answer?
I've got a question, James.
Carry on.
The question is, it's about national anthems.
Right.
And I wondered, is the UK the only country in the world which has a national anthem which is dedicated to a living individual?
Why did you say living?
I won't make you laugh because I'm a very boring person.
No, you're not, David. Not at all. I mean, you're almost making me laugh there, which I suspect was your intention, wasn't it?
No, not me.
You said living with quite a bit of emphasis. It suggests that you know of an anthem that praises a dead person.
No, it doesn't. I don't know. But I can imagine circumstances. For example, let's take maybe Turkey. Where the most famous person in their history is Attaturk. The founder of the nation. So I could envisage their national anthem being based around that.
Yes. So our glorious founder almost, our glorious whatever.
Exactly.
So is there another national anthem that praises... a living person is the question. A head of state is probably the... I mean, what about other royal families? Do they not have national anthems that praise the head of the royal family?
The reason I'm asking the question, James, is Thailand. I don't have a clue.
Thailand. I bet you Thailand. And Thailand have...
could be.
They imbue their king with religious significance, as in like a demigod. So that might... Well, anyway, the point is I don't know, and nor do you. So that's why you're asking.
Yep.
Thank you. Do any other countries have a national anthem which praises or is simply dedicated to a living person? May not be praising it, maybe saying he's a right old wrong un. I can't believe it. I'm glad he's dead. That kind of thing. No, living person. Living. 12:07 is the time. Bo's in Bridgend. Bo, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
Why don't you ever see a seagull in a tree?
That sounds like the first line of a joke, Bo.
No. Why? I've done due diligence here, you know, and the outbuildings on the floor in a sparsely, but never in a tree. Never seen a seagull in a tree?
I don't know if I've ever seen a seagull. It sounds like a George Formby song now.
Yeah, you think of this now.
I've never seen a seagull in a tree. I've never seen a seagull in a tree. I've never seen a seagull. I've never seen a seagull. Oh, no, you're right.
Jim, I'm about 15 miles from the coast here, okay?
Yeah.
Now, if I'm a seagull, I'm thinking, right, I'm off down to the coast now to steal some chips, okay?
Yeah.
So I've got 15 miles to go. Surely I'm going to need a whiff and stop somewhere.
You'll have a little rest.
In a tree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A handy spot. Well, I think you're sort of probably in the process of answering the question yourself. So seagulls,
I don't know.
Well, they live on cliffs, don't they? They roost on cliffs, and therefore buildings that can deputise for cliffs, they will stop on. So it's probably got something to do with predation. So they don't like trees, but they will rest on
I live on a lot of junk food, but if I'm hungry, I'm going to have a salad, don't I?
Well, but you go. There's buildings. They don't find themselves in areas where there aren't any places to stop.
So really, you're saying they haven't got the intelligence to think, I'm quite tired, you're landing on a lovely branch over there, landing that tree.
I don't know if it's intelligence. I think they don't like the cover. I think they like to be able to see clearly. That's why they're called seagulls, because they need to be able to see clearly in front of them, and they can't have any leaves or trees getting in the way.
I can see clearly now the trees are gone.
Also, haven't they got webbed feet?
I've no idea how a seagull.
I think they've got. I think that's your answer.
How would they steal? How would they steal people's food with webbed feet?
Well, I'll show you, Bo. Put the phone down.
They got claws. They got claws.
They haven't got claws. Put me on speaker.
What do you mean? Put you on speaker?
Are you on the phone line or a landline?
Phone line, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, if you put me on a speakerphone and put your phone down and you were talking to me and I said, right, now hold your fingers together so you've got webbed hands, right?
But how do they steal food with webbed hands?
You can still pick up a phone. You can still snatch some chips with webbed feet.
Well, like a baseball glove and scoop it up like.
Yeah, no, like two baseball gloves like next to each. That would be one way. So the answer is webbed feet.
The answer, they don't land in trees because they got webbed feet.
They can't grip the tree. They can only settle on flat surfaces.
Oh, James, you're on dodgy ground here.
What do you mean dodgy ground? That's an obvious answer.
I don't agree with your answer.
What do you mean you don't agree with my answer? Do seagulls have webbed feet?
You made that up.
I did not make that up. I worked it out.
You worked it out?
I worked it out.
Oh, God, I hope there's an expert on seagulls.
They do have webbed feet. That's why they swim. That's how they can swim so well.
Oh, God, well...
I'm right. That's why you're embarrassed now. Oh, my
I'm not embarrassed.
You are embarrassed. You should be.
I'm not convinced of the argument that they got webbed feet.
Well, they have got webbed feet.
Are you looking at a picture of a seagull there?
No. I'm imagining one in my mind's eye.
Right. Done with it. Yeah, okay then.
All right. That's why.
In the interest of getting other people on the show, I'll accept your answer.
Well, you don't have to. Also, they grab your food with their beaks, you prune, not with their feet.
No, they don't. They come feet first.
They do not. They come swooping down and grab it with their mouth.
I was down in Devon and attacked by a cormorant no more than 3 weeks ago.
This is supposed to be... God almighty, this is supposed to be a serious mystery, Abbo. You're making me laugh.
It's serious.
It's not serious. It's got feet.
You can... The dense foliage we have now in trees, you could easily land on with webbed feet anyway.
Well, that all right. I'll leave it on the board then. So why don't seagulls land in trees? Thank you, Bo. But it's because they got webbed feet. 11 minutes after 12 is the time. Alex is in Carmarthen. Alex, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Alex.
I hate to do this to a fellow Welshman, but you're absolutely right about the seagulls.
Yeah, there you go. Webbed feet,
their feet are adapted for paddling. Their feet don't bend in that manner, so they can obviously land on a flat surface, but to grip a branch, which very well may be moving, they're just not capable of it.
So he might as well have asked why you never see a duck in a tree.
Exactly the same. Any water bird, they can't do it. They physically can't do it.
A swan?
Have you ever seen a swan in a tree?
Never seen a swan in a tree, Alex.
Or a goose?
Never seen a goose in a tree. Never seen a gull in a tree. Never seen a tern in a tree. You could perhaps, some of the wading birds have, do they have webbed feet or do they have...
I think most waders have a degree of webbing, but there may be a few. But again, even those you don't see them in trees.
You're not going to see them in a tree. And again, is it true that they steal food with their beaks, not their feet? I think it is true, isn't it? But it's not even relevant to the question.
Again, they've got the dexterity to, to handle their eggs on cliff tops with their feet. A large stroke. They don't. Of course. They take it with their beaks.
Yes. Qualifications?
Been a keen amateur ornithologist since I was a member of the RSPB when I was from about 8 years old.
Oh, lovely!
And I live by the coast.
I'm a member of the RSPB. Are you no longer a member of the RSPB?
I think it may have lapsed, sadly.
Well, you want to sort that out, mate. They need all the help they can get at the moment. I'm a member of the RSPB. We've got a family membership. Thank you, Alex. Round of applause, please. A lovely answer. So I asked. I was just going to do a little bit of a staff meeting now, if that's all right. I specifically said, don't put through silly questions or funny callers. And the second caller was Bo asking why you never see a seagull in a tree. I don't think you're taking my injury very seriously, frankly. That made me laugh. Jackson Ipswich. Jack, question or answer?
Hi, it's a question, please.
Carry on.
Why is one side of a bar of soap soft and the other side hard?
What?
Yeah. So I'm a gardener.
Yeah.
And when I come in from work, my hands are filthy.
Right.
So I get the bar of soap. It can be a brand new one out of the packet, or it can be on the side.
Yeah.
Put it under the tap, scratch it.
Yeah.
So you scratch the softer side to fill your nails up with soap. Then you get the nail brush and give it a jolly good old scrub, and your hands are clean. But there's always the other side of the bar of soap, which is hard, and you can't scratch.
I just don't recognise. What brand of soap do you use?
It doesn't matter.
Well, it does matter because we use Imperial leather, and this doesn't happen with Imperial leather. Don't laugh like that. It does not. Ow! It does not.
It really does, James. It really does. Even when you go to a hotel and you bring back one of those little packets of soap, a little posh one.
I don't think this is true. You've just got one side gets wet.
No, it can be a brand new bar of soap out of the packet. Honestly, I do it every day, and I often think.
I do trust you. I don't think you're yanking my chain, but I think you're mistaken.
No, I don't think I am.
I'm just going to have another staff meeting. All right. Just, excuse me. Do you recognise this at all? I'd never encountered this. Eleanor, do you know about this soap? You use soap, surely. Have you got one side hard and one side soft? Have you ever? What? Yes, one side's wet and one side's less wet. No one really recognises the circumstances behind your question, Jack.
Well, maybe.
So what brand do you use at the moment? Oh, no, you've already answered that.
Well, no, I've got a Duff bar upstairs in the bath.
Duff?
I sometimes just get straight into the bath.
Yes.
And do my nails there. Or at the draining board in the utility room, I've just got an Asda, bog standard brand of soap.
I don't think it's doing this thing that you say it's doing when it's straight out the packet.
Really is.
I think it's because it's rested on one side of the...
It really is.
Oh, hang on. You've got some support. An unsigned text has come in saying, it's true, James, re-soap. But then another text came in at the same time and said, I don't know what she's on about either.
Well, maybe you don't get your hands dirty.
52-48. No, well, we'll find out for you, Jack.
Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. It's 12:16. It is 10-1. Adam has it 100% right, says Tony. I'm from the outside with an inside view. I'm Spanish, but very Polish, having married a Poland and known Poland well since 1988. Well done, Adam. You've done a very good job, and now I don't need to call in. I keep you in the loop on where Tony is at the moment. We're talking about the Polish election results, which I should stress, and I know I have done, but I'll stress again, it is at the moment an exit poll that appears poised to deliver victory to Donald Tusk's coalition. But my goodness me, the crash course I'm receiving in just how far to the right the country had lurched, or the government had lurched under the Law and Justice Party, not only chilling, but also, as Adam quite expertly detailed there, and Amelia and Joanna and all my callers today, Monica, the echoes I hear of what's going on here are impossible to ignore. I'm to the point where I never really understood the wisdom or the thinking behind setting up a TV channel, hemorrhaging tens of millions of pounds and filling it with Tory politicians in the knowledge that hardly anyone was watching. But it doesn't matter, does it? If you're seeding social media and you're getting these talking points and conspiracy theories and blatant lies, and of course epic sexism as well, you're getting it into public discourse, not via traditional viewing figures, but via, it's all my fault, isn't it, for inventing viral clips in the context of current affairs in the UK. But it is all beginning to make a little bit more sense, and it ties in where the racism, where racism goes, misogyny follows. Persecution of immigrants followed by persecution of female sexual autonomy. And tying it in with bogus claims towards patriotism or family values, in this case pandering to extremities within the Roman Catholic Church and demonising immigrants and the European Union. It's almost as if there's a playbook, isn't it? It's almost as if there's a playbook, 1253. And of course, if they're using the playbook as the same playbook as their American counterpart, then you can expect claims that the election results themselves are not to be trusted coming up in the coming days. There were reports that Israel and Hamas deny a Gaza ceasefire. So if you've come across any reports that there was some sort of ceasefire in place in order perhaps to allow people to cross the so-called Rafah crossing into Egypt, that is now being denied. So it looks as if that, it's certainly in a holding pattern, but it's not currently happening at the moment. And I think if that were to open, then you'd have humanitarian aid coming in one direction and an exodus of humanity in the other. But that story, as Sheila just alluded to in her trailer there, is going to be unfolding still further and faster throughout the day and the coming days on LBC. 12:54 is the time. Judith is in Hounslow. Back to Polish politics. Judith, what can you tell us?
Hello, James.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much for having this.
Don't thank me. I'm loving it. I'm fascinated. I'm not taking any credit for it at all. I've been absolutely riveted by the callers. I've loved every minute of it.
Having speaking about Polish politics is so important because it's important to talk about European politics. But what I wanted to say is what you alluded to just before the break, which is, of course, this is the exit poll results. So my champagne is out of the fridge and I have taken off the foil and I'm about to undo the wire, but I haven't popped the cork yet.
Fair enough, don't pop the cork. Always wise.
I am very, very optimistic, though. However, it will require Donald Tusk and the coalition partners to make a very swift decision, and I hope they have been talking up until now, a very swift decision and offer to form a government. Of course, it is the right of the Polish president to actually allow a minority government to be formed by the party who got the most votes, which is the Law and Justice Party. If that were to happen, of course, they would struggle governing, and the government hopefully would fall apart very quickly. But we might have to go through this because the Polish president is also from the Law and Justice Party.
Yes.
And then hopefully, once that's over, we can then start talking about forming coalition government. I'm very happy about this because I believe coalition governments are the future. And we see them a lot in European countries, and I think this is the way forward: is to really find a consensus. And sometimes it's difficult, but that's the right way to do it. Polarized politics, like we have in the UK, are becoming a thing of the past. But also, I'm very, very happy about those results because it shows that the young people, and there was amazing turnout of the young people at the elections yesterday, are really progressive and liberal, and it's a welcome return to what Polish politics used to be back in the 80s when we were able to think for ourselves and we were able to exercise critical thinking, and we actually managed to change the course of history.
So why do we think that is? Because you're right, a larger proportion, and this is extraordinary in the context of European elections, a larger proportion of 18 to 29-year-olds turned out than over 60s, which obviously if that had been the case in this country for the last 20 years, it would be an entirely unrecognisable country. So why have they proved immune to the power grab of media and judiciary, do you think?
I think partially because they can see that their freedom is being limited little by little.
Yeah.
But I also think it's a great triumph of using social media for the good. I mean, we in this country have seen how the social media could be used
for the bad.
Detriment. Yes, exactly.
Yes, we have.
In the Brexit vote.
Yes.
But I tell you what, I listened to your previous caller, Adam, and how he was explaining how people refuse to take the referendum card. I have also done that yesterday. But I have done that as a result of being educated through Facebook. There were Polish legal professionals who were tweeting how to do it and not to just spoil the ballot, not just invalidate. And a lot of people were sharing this information. That's how I found out, and I have proceeded according to that route, and that has led us to the invalid referendum result, which is fantastic. But I think we can use social media and be successful at it.
Well, ideally you won't have to next time because the media won't have been sort of colonised or populated.
You never know where the evil's going to come from.
No, you don't, and you remind us of the importance of it. And Facebook, of course, playing a role there, but perhaps Twitter not playing the role that it would have done 2 or 3 years ago because it's been so sort of compromised and corrupted by Elon Musk's purchase. Judith, I'm going to move on, but only because I think the next caller might be my neighbour.
Thank you.
Is that all right?
Thanks very much, Dave.
Thank you, Judith. So I'm going to try and say it again in the Polish way, even though the last Adam to ring in mocked me and humiliated me. Adam is in Brentford. Adam, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I am indeed your neighbour, James. Hello, how are you? I always pass you by. I'm always embarrassed to say hello.
Well, make sure you do next time. To be honest, we've only really got time to say hello to each other now, but I could give you 30 seconds.
First of all, thank you for covering.
Pleasure.
Thank you for covering, Dave, and thank you for being a friend, because you've been a friend across all these years you've been on the radio.
Oh, lovely.
For us, for all as immigrants, for all as Poles. Whether they know about your existence or they don't. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That's lovely.
It's good to know. Thank you for covering. It's good to know what's going on in your neighboring countries.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
And it's such a relief for me as a Polish person living in the UK for 15 years. It's such a relief to see these results. Fair enough, there are just exit polls, but it shows that there is a hope. And there's a drive. If something's bad going on and you're really hitting a wall, there is hope always, whatever happening.
I think we'll take that. I warned you that we were short of time. We will catch up, no doubt, in person sooner rather than later. But that is it. You're right. I was asked last night at the end of my event in Cheltenham about hope, and it never goes away. There will always be hope, and Polish people particularly feeling that today. Thank you, mate, and I'll see you soon. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. You rewind live radio or enjoy the whole show podcast. All of LBC's shows are there, as well as the best video clips from LBC. Rewind live radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.